Hello, this is Houston and welcome to Polygonal Modeling Techniques and Tools Part 5, where I am putting together a very complex project showing the entire workflow of creating a concept, putting together all the objects, modeling everything. And on this particular video, I'm going to talk about how I put this scene together, and I will also talk about some not so artistical aspects, a lot of technical aspects, starting with UV mapping, okay, and how I usually organize the scale of my objects to work with references. Just so you know, this is what we had so far. And the next part will be dedicated to scene layout using the approach I explained on my last video, which is using references. And using references is something extremely powerful. It's a very, very, very powerful workflow, and you can use this thing in the future because you will be forced to work with other professionals doing several things at the same time, okay? And working on a very procedural and referenced workflow is going to give you superpowers in this thing, because you don't have to wait until someone finished their work to be able to do yours. Okay, so we are going to talk about this scene layout, how I put things together. I will also briefly talk about the way I created materials, and I have to be very clear, I'm not going to show you the way I created materials because it's super simple, okay? I'm not using external textures, so I'm not going to spend any time explaining how to create materials and how to apply materials, because you already know how to do this by now, okay? The only important thing is most of the time I use flat colors, and what I mean by that is just the color of a simple material, okay? I'm not using in any possible way external bitmap files or external textures on this project, okay? I was very clear since the beginning, I don't want to see external textures. I don't want to see this kind of thing on your project. That's why I am not using, but I am using procedural textures. You can use any procedural textures you want, but I don't want to see external textures, at least on this specific project. But to the next two projects, I would like to see, of course, external textures, okay? And I will explain how I work with the lighting and shading. I will not give a lot of details because these videos are already very large, and they took a long time to produce, and I really don't want to spend a lot of time, and I'm pretty sure that most of you don't spend a lot of time watching, which is sad because, again, it's information for you and it's absolutely free, and I don't even have to do that because the information I give you during the classes, they are already more than enough to give you a very good starting point. But doing that is going to ensure that you have all the information you need, even talking about advanced topics and some advanced topics and things that I don't have time to talk during the classes. Okay, so anyway, I will show you how I work with lighting and rendering, how I create my two scenes. I will talk about special types of textures, including the wireframe I've been asking you to produce. Okay, at the end I will talk briefly about post-production, how I take this image, how I bring it to Photoshop, how I treat this image in Photoshop, and so on. Okay, so I really hope you enjoyed this video, and let's jump into Maya, because the first thing I would like to talk is how I am dealing with UV maps in this context. Okay, this approach that I'm going to show you, this thing doesn't work on every single scenario, but on this specific scenario this will work fine because I'm using just internal textures and I don't care too much about UV layout. Okay, so let's kick started. Here I am inside Maya, and this is one of the objects that I would like to bring inside my final scene. And this is a pier. As you can see, I have a bunch of objects. They are very well modeled and they are ready to be used inside my project, and I modeled this thing using exactly the same techniques I've been showing you over and over and over. And what I did is, of course, center pivots, delete history, freeze transformation. The center pivot is not necessary, but I like to do that, and just in case I have to move one specific object on a individual way. As you can see, they are inside this group, and of course the group, when we create the group, the center point of the group is usually at the center of the word. If that's not the case, you can always ungroup everything. So I will just take the name here on the account of my laziness. So I will ungroup this thing, and if you treat the objects and do whatever you want to do, you can group and then rename this guy, and then the pivot point of this group, it will be always at the center of the word. Of course, the scale, which is a small problem, a small inconvenience here, is absolutely wrong, but you can bring different scale objects inside your final scene. This is not a problem. I'm not going to talk about that because this is so small that doesn't make any sense for us right now. Okay, the most important thing is about talking it's about the UVs. Okay, I have to talk about the UVs. So let's go to the UV layout here. So let's bring the UV editing. I would like to show you that we already have some UVs going on here, but just to be on the safe side, I can select everything, go to the UV menu here on the modeling menu set, and UV, and then delete UVs. Just so you know, I always like to work on a very well organized UV layout, but since I don't have the obligation of working with let me say very organized textures for this specific use case, I can take a approach to work on a more free way. What I mean by that is, if you select this guy here, for example, the ideal scenario was probably have all the pieces separated. If you see here, everything is together, everything is inside exactly one single mesh. There's nothing wrong about that, but this brings problem to the textures in the future. If you're looking for something more realistic, this is not the way to work. Okay, you should keep things separated, and you should texture and you should create UVs on a separate way, on a very careful way, and you should lay out the textures on a way that you can, if you want, make adjustments later on using Photoshop. But in this case, I really don't care, because I'm using just procedural textures most of the time, just flat colors. Okay, so I don't have even to think about UV mapping in this case. And if that's the case, I still need UVs, but I can work with automatic UV mapping. Okay, by the way to create this guy here is you can go to UV and use automatic. And automatic UV mapping doesn't mean automatic in the sense of doing a good job. It just mean that he's going to create projections from every single side. It's like putting a box here around this object and projecting this box on every single side. The side effect of this choice is we are going to have hundreds of pieces. Okay, and the good side is we don't have to think too much, because in this case I'm going to use just a flat color. Okay, I'm not going to put like very careful textures on, for example, this side of the board or this side of this log here. I'm not going to put details. Okay, so if that's the case, I don't have to care too much about the organization of the UV layout. But if you're working with a very realistic object, if you are working on a character, if you're working with something that you're going to show very close to the camera, you should be careful with this approach. This approach will not work for everything, okay? But just for the sake of speed, I'm going to use this approach on all of the objects that I'm going to use on this scene, including the house and the lighthouse and now the other assets that I have. Maybe the island. The island, I will probably use a different approach, okay? But anyway, I don't have to worry too much about UVs, not in this case, okay? But of course, every choice brings consequences, so you have to be aware of those consequences in the future. Okay, so in this case, how to work with that is just clicking automatic, and I will have this automatic projection, projecting things around the object on all of the directions, okay? And after that, I have to organize this layout here because I have, as you can see, a lot of pieces and a lot of emptiness here. So organizing the layout is going to give us a little bit of space. Okay, and the way to do that is if you go to shell here, for example, we could take some objects and we could organize the objects a little bit more, because right now the only concern about this automatic is just we spread the pieces, okay? But the sizes of the objects, and by the way, there's a bunch of weirdness here, and you should be aware that this might happen on very complex objects, depending on the modeling, depending on the type of projection. There's no magic bullet, okay? So we have to be very careful with the choices we make. And in this case, the impact of this choice is, this thing is, I have a lot of pieces, and this might be a little bit complicated to work piece by piece, okay? Again, we don't have to work piece by piece. We don't have to care too much about this, because since I'm going to use procedural textures, this doesn't affect too much the way the texture is positioned, unless I'm using UV as a way to guide the textures. Okay, so the next thing I do after this automatic layout here is to go to this arrange and layout category and click on layout. Before doing that, I would like to show you some options of this guy here. Okay, to access the options of the menus and the commands here, there's no square box here. Okay, there's two ways to do that. If you go to UV shell, for example, select all the pieces here, hold shift right mouse button, and you can go to layout. Okay, and on the side of the command, this is the command, by the way, this is the same command that you are seeing here. Okay, on the side of the command you will see this small square. Okay, I use some options here, and I would like to explain the options to you. The other way to access this thing is if you hold shift and press on this button, left mouse button, just click on this guy, you will see the same window before you apply the command. Okay, first of all, we have two options: Unfold 3D and Legacy. Legacy was the old way of treating UVs that Maya had, but back then, a few years ago, they created this plugin called Unfold 3D, and Autodesk bought the company and took the plugin and incorporate the technology inside Maya. And there's a lot of other technologies that do not belong to Autodesk originally, and they bought companies and they bring the technology inside Autodesk. Okay, this is one of the many things that the guys from Autodesk they usually do. Okay, at least this is better than some companies like Microsoft, which in the past bought companies just to destroy the technology because the technology threatens some other things they do inside the company. Anyway, I would like to use this packing resolution. I'm not going to explain what that means, okay? But you have to know that this number here is related to the way I intend to generate textures to this specific object, and I use this number here as a rule of thumb, as a way to guide the distribution of the pieces. So if I put a number here, in this case a 2K, okay, I am guiding the layout and saying, okay, this is basically the way I would like to concentrate the textures or the way the texture is going to be created. Okay, so try to put things on a certain way that all the objects, if they receive this texture, they appear with a good quality. So talking on a very simple way, this is what this guy does. Okay, same thing here, texture map size. So I have to work with this size here, or I can of course work with 4K. In this case, this 2K here is again a way to push this number and this number as a way to organize my layout in order to extract every single pixel to show more texture. Okay, it's related. Those two numbers, they are related with the quality of the texture that we are going to generate when we hit this layout UVs. Okay, another very important thing is we have two padding. Padding is the distance between the objects. Okay, and this is super important because if we have to do some adjustments by hand inside Photoshop and those pieces, they're very close to each other, we might have some problems. So for example, if we put 0 and 0 here, I will explain what tile padding means. Okay, you can apply. If you apply, you're not going to close this thing. As you can see, there's a very almost inexistent distance between the shells. Sometimes you have the impression that there are a distance, but there's not a distance actually, because of the shape of this object. We have the impression that we have distance, but if you put a square around every single tiling, you will see that we don't have this spacing. Okay, so what I usually do is, okay, I know this thing is 2K, and if I put like 10 pixels here, I will have this shell, every single part of this thing here, every single piece here is called shell, sorry. If you hold the right mouse button, you can see, like, you can select edges like this, right? You can select UVs like this. You can also select shell. You're going to select the entire piece. So this is a shell, this is another shell. Okay, so the distance between shells can be 10 pixels. If we do that and apply, of course we have to select the shells. It doesn't make any sense to apply to nothing, right? So we have to apply, and he's going to calculate, and then he's going to put 10 pixels between every single piece, which is awesome. Okay, the next value is tile padding. Tile is we can, but I advise you not to do that, at least not now. We can use more than one space, UV space. Okay, this first UV space here is called UV1. So U1V1. Some softwares, including Maya, of course, but some texturing softwares, some advanced texture softwares, they support multi-tiling UVs. What that means, if you have a character, you can create the head of the character here. So the head is going to receive this entire square texture here. More texture, more resolution, more quality. And the hands, they can be here. The legs, they can be here, the body can be here, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you can separate multiple pieces or multiple groups of shells into multiple parts, and you can create this thing called UDIM. Okay, UDIM. UDIM workflows are super advanced, and this is out of the scope of this course. Okay, so right now let's keep the rule, which is let's try to keep everything simple and inside just one UV shell. Okay, you are seeing those two textures here because since this value is 0, I have no distance between this shell or this UV set and this UV set. Let me take this thing out just to make this thing very clear. The UVs is almost touching the other UV set. Okay, that's why Maya is showing the next UV set. So in this case, I would like to put, again, 10 pixels of distance between the shells, between this UV settings here, sorry, no, it's not shell, it's a setting. And this UV set, and this UV set, and this UV set, and this UV set. So if I put 10 pixels, I will literally shrink this entire group to be inside of this 0 to 1 square here. And this is exactly what I want. So I'm going to select everything, and I will hit, as you can see, it's very, very close to the border, right? I will hit apply, and he's going to recalculate, and he's going to push this thing towards the center. So this is what I usually do to create my UVs. Okay, so since those settings they are already here, I don't have to worry about this thing anymore. I just have to create the UVs using the automatic mapping, and I have to arrange this thing on a simple way. So let's do the same thing with those 3 objects here. And so for example, this guy here, I can create a automatic mapping, and I can go straight to layout with all the objects selected and click layout, and he's going to organize everything to have the best possible placement, respecting the distance between the shells and respecting the distance from the edge here. Okay, by the way, the distance from the edge is absolutely important for other softwares. So in the future, you are going to learn how to use ZBrush, for example, to do the sculpting. And on sculpting softwares, we tend to require that the sculpting softwares, they tend to require this small space between or far from the border, just to avoid problems during the sculpting. Okay, if you bring something with UV mapping, this is mandatory. So you have to use this technique over and over and over. And of course, when you use this technique with the layout, putting a little bit of distance, you can apply the same workflow to any type of UV layout you do. Okay, the only difference here is I'm not putting a lot of effort on this UV layout because I don't need, I already explained that. So in this case, let's do this again. Automatic layout, the next one, go to the object mode. So again, automatic and layout, and this is going to be very interesting because the automatic layout tries to respect, for example, the isolation of this object and put absolutely nothing inside. But when I click layout, you will see that inside this guy I have a lot of space, so I could put some small pieces here just to better use this space. So when you click layout with those settings, he tries to organize the entire pieces and all the pieces to extract the most of the texturing space for you. It's very convenient. Okay, so there you go. We have a bunch of pieces and they are trying to be bigger. The algorithm is trying to organize everything in order to extract the most of the textures that you are going to create for this guy in the future. Okay, so this is basically what I do for the UV mapping. And as a final step, of course, try to remember, select everything, delete the history, freeze the transformation, check if every single object already have a UV mapping, try to check if everything is okay. And I would like to show you one specific case very, very fast before we finish this video, or this part of the video, when the UV mapping makes a lot of difference, and the UV mapping or the choices we make on the UV mapping can kind of ruin our life. Okay, so let's go to the general. Okay, if you are using flat colors, so let's take just this guy here. I'm going to hide the other objects, but they are absolutely the same case. Okay, I'm going to take this guy here. I'm going to create a new material. Go to our node shader, AI standard surface, and in this case, this is going to be our test material. And I'm going to color, and once again, if you don't want to use any textures, you just have to work with the color. So for example, I want something kind of bluish and something towards like gray, or maybe brown, something brownish like this. It could be the color of my peer. I could work with colors like this, so brown, or something more, you know, bluish, greenish, I'm not sure, something like this. Okay, for flat colors, you will never notice that you have any problems of UVs, okay? And everything will be fine. Maya is not going to complain about anything, but if you decide to use a texture, any type of texture, if this texture is not procedural, you will start seeing problems with the UV mapping, okay? So in this case, let's click here and let's bring one of my favorite textures called ramp. Okay, if you try to apply a ramp and show the ramp, you will see right away that, okay, there's something weird here. Okay, what's going on? What's going on is since I chose a layout to work with my UV mapping, this layout is kind of ruining the way the UVs are presented on my material. You just have to remember that if you go to the hypershade and if you try to bring this test material here, you will see something interesting. So this material is, this is the material, this is the ramp that I just created, and this is a place UV, okay? So this guy here is using the information of the UV mapping in order to take this texture and control on the surface of the material that you apply this material, on the surface of the object that you apply this material, okay? Basically, that is what's going on. Okay, so if you want to avoid problems, you should work with the UV coords. The UV coordinates here, the UV coords is exactly this guy here, okay? If you want to see the names of the objects, you can hit 5 on your keyboard and you see that this is the AI standard surface. This is the name of the material, the name of the shader, okay? This is the name of the texture, the original name of the texture, so I'm using a ramp. And this is the name of the node that is controlling this guy who is applied to this guy. If you hit 5 again, you can hide everything. If you hit 5 again, you can see the names that you gave to the object. So this is test mat, this is ramp 1. Of course, you can change the name here, but this is the name you give to the object. The name of the object originally, we should hit 5, sorry. The name of the node is ramp. Okay, the ramp is the gradient. But anyway, this is just for the sake of curiosity, okay? How to deal with that in order to kind of hide this problem. So you should play with this node here. Okay, let's close this thing. Let's go to the attribute editor. On the attribute editor, you have the place to the texture here. And this place to the texture can help you to control the way this thing happens. By the way, let's go back a little bit. And let's play with the colors here, because this color is super duper boring. Let's try something bluish or something kind of brown. Not sure. Bluish. No, I want something brown. Yeah. Something like this. Or maybe like this. Not sure. And on the other side, you just have to click on this small ball here, click here, and then change the color to something else. Okay, something like this. Okay, there is a lot of ways to work with this, guys, but you should be aware that if you choose this very crazy UV mapping that I use, the automatic mapping, you will find problems. If this is not a visual problem for you, don't worry, okay, everything is fine. But if this is a problem, you should go to the texture, you should look to the node, to the UV coords. You can go inside of this guy and you can try to change the behavior of this guy a little bit more, okay? So for example, here we have, let me see, we have the rotation, for example, of this guy. Let's try to select just the node. Yes. So if I select the node here, I don't even have to select the object on the screen. Okay. And I can play with the values here. I can play with the angles. Okay. I cannot use interactive placement because this is meant to be used by NURBS surfaces. Okay. I can mirror you, I can mirror V, okay? I can try to wrap just around one axis and so on. I can do some small tweaks here. I can rotate the UVs, I can use noise, I can use a lot of things. One way to solve this harshness here, there's not a lot of ways to solve this. To be very honest, there's not a lot of ways to solve this problem. But you can try to rotate the UVs in order to kind of hide a little bit, but you will always see some weirdness happening in some parts. Okay, again, this can be part of your design if you don't care too much about that. Okay, but again, if you try to hit the interactive placement, you see that this is not possible. Okay, so that's why having textures placed on a very specific way is something very, very important. Okay, another thing that you can try if you want is if you go to the UV editing, you see that we have all the pieces here. So let's go to UV shell, and you can try to, sorry, let me select the things because I was not using the selection. Okay, so if you select all the shells, you can try to instead of layout along, instead of just hitting layout, you can layout along U, you can layout along V. Okay, and this can be interesting because you can change the way you are placing the pieces that constitute this this amount of object. Okay, so again, there's a lot of options you can tweak. There's a lot of options you can try to do. Okay, so for example, we have this shell rotation or pre-scaling and translation and rotation of the shells. You can define the amount of rotation. You can do a lot of things, so it's a matter of research. Okay, you have to be aware that there's a lot of limitations, and one of the limitations when it comes to UVs and R-node is exactly that. So sometimes you are kind of stuck with this UV thing here. Okay, another way that you can, another thing that you can try to explore is, let's delete this thing here and let's go to R-node, and you can use R-node nodes to try to tweak this thing. Okay, so for example, if you go to texture, you have this AI image. Okay, and the problem of the AI image, sorry, is it expects you to use a external image, but when you try to use this guy, you will see that he do not require the same thing as the file node. Okay, we're going to talk about this in the future, because when you try to use the file node, so for example, to use the external texture, this external texture is controlled by this 2D placement texture. So we have 2D placement and we have 3D placement. Okay, so the ramp, since ramp is a 2-dimensional texture, this might be a little bit challenging. So how to deal with that? So in this case, you cannot place a 2D texture using a 3D placement, because 2D placement requires a 2D node to control. Okay, so just keep in mind that AI image, if you bring external textures, you can use the UV coordinates inside the node itself. So this is one of the many reasons that people like very much to use R-node AI image instead of the classic Maya file node. Okay, so since we cannot use external textures because this is a rule that I impose, another way to solve this problem is, again, let's try to connect a ramp here, and the ramp is connected. I will change the ramp here, so the color is going to be kind of scandalous, just to make clear this point. I will choose also okay, if you want to delete color, you can click here. If you click here, you should see the color. Okay, the color palette is here, so we can select that, and this is the final texture. Okay, it's horrible, but one way to deal with that, and why this thing changed? Okay, change it because I didn't apply for some reason the green, and that's exactly what I want. Okay, so to make it very clear on creative ways to solve this problem, let's suppose that you want a gradient on the entire object from bottom to top. Okay, if that's the case, something you can do is go to the UV mapping, and instead of doing this type of mapping, you can do a flat mapping like this, UV planar, but you have to look to the axis. So in this case, I want to project on this direction, which by the way is the Z axis. So I have to click here, Z. You just have to reset this guy and click Z and then project. And you will see right away that if you do that, you can use this type of gradient. This is a very creative way to work with UVs. So you will have this type of UV, but as a final result, you will have this type of effect. Okay, if you are looking to the effect and ignoring the UVs, this is a good way to solve this problem. Okay, I will probably use something like this, okay, unless I use any other approach, but this is a very good way to control the placement of the procedural textures on your object. And procedural textures, I mean the ramp is a procedural texture. Okay, so instead of using the automatic UV mapping, you can use a projection, and this projection is going to guarantee that the entire object behaves on a very specific way. Can I do that? Yes, for illustrations, you are absolutely free to use that. If you want to use this object on any other scenarios, like games or whatever, you cannot. Okay, so don't think that this is a magic bullet. This is going to solve all of your problems always, because it's not. Okay, this is just for the purpose of preparing objects to receive procedural textures for illustrations, for generating beautiful renders. But other than that, this is absolutely wrong. Okay, so be aware of that. I'm not teaching the wrong things. I'm teaching how to use the tools on a very creative way, but I'm making very, very clear this point. I can't stress this enough. This is wrong. This is horrible. Okay, this is extremely anti-professional if you try to use this type of UV mapping outside Maya, or to do anything else other than generating movies and animations inside Maya. I'm just giving you some tips. So if you want to use this thing in games, this is absolutely unacceptable. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm just giving you tools and the freedom to create things, but everything, again, every choice that we make, they have consequences. So be careful on using this knowledge on other fields and other applications. Okay, so now I'm going to finish the texturing of all of the objects, probably using this approach, or if I use any other creative approach, I will make sure to show you why, how I'm doing, and why I choose to do things the way I choose. I would like to talk about something very important, and we are probably going to talk about this thing in the future, but I decided to bring this knowledge now just as a way to show that there is a lot of different ways to solve problems, to solve the same problems using different approaches. And I would like to talk about one very interesting approach called triplanar projection. This projection is something that you can find on several other software. So for example, I miss this feature very much inside Maya, because I had this feature in 3ds Max. And it works amazingly because I don't have to invest a lot of time working with UVs, and I can take a texture and I can project this texture using a cube, and this cube is going to literally project using the 6 sides of the cube, and I have this parameter called blend. And using this parameter blend on this triplanar projection shader, I can create effects like this. So for example, you have an object and this object is UV-less. There's no UVs whatsoever. And if I project my texture on the surface of this cube and use the blend variable, I can go from this thing here. If you look at the edges of the cube, you will see the effect. I can go from this thing to this thing. I can literally blend between the parts of my projection, and this is extremely interesting. But of course, I have to be very honest, there's a lot of limitations, including if you try to use this type of thing for animations, maybe using bumps, or if you want to create something extremely complicated. Again, the professional way to deal with that is always do UV mapping. But if you are in a hurry and if you want to take a small shortcut because you need to do so, you can use this triplanar projection trick. This is extremely professional, but just works inside Maya. So doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to be able to use this thing on a game engine, for example. For game engines, you should spend time working on your UVs and painting textures using procedural software like Substance Painter, whatever, but you should do that anyway. Okay, so I'm giving you some possibilities to solve the problem very fast, very quickly inside Maya without spending a lot of time. Okay, so this thing have the great advantage of since I am projecting my textures around my object, I can change the topology of my object and the projection will remain. Okay, this is super powerful because I can invest more time being creative and less time working with UVs if I am not sure exactly how my object is going to feel when I finish the texturing process. Okay, so just so you know, this is a very interesting way to solve the problem that I showed on the previous section. You know that I had to do like a UV projection from the side, for example, to be able to use a texture and to project this texture just in one direction. And in this case, I don't have to do that. I can use a triplanar and I will solve the problem of the UVs without having to go back to the object and destroying the UVs to create new UVs. Okay, so this is one of the many approaches. This is not the only approach. Okay, how this thing works? So basically you have your material and you have this AI triplanar shader, and this shader should be put between your material and your texture. Your texture could be a procedural texture, could be a bitmap texture, doesn't matter. So before you connect your texture to your material, you put this triplanar in between and you use the triplanar to project this texture on the surface of your object, almost ignoring the UV mapping that you created on this object. Okay, so let me show you how this thing works on a quickie way. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this because again, we are going to talk about projections in the future, and I'm thinking about including this thing you know, later on. But just so you know, this is a very professional way of solving quick things inside the 3D software without having to invest a tremendous amount of time redoing UVs. Okay, so let's see how this thing works. Here in Maya, I have basically the same scene, and I have a material applied to this guy. As you can see, it's a AI standard surface material. And just for the sake of curiosity, if you go to the UV mapping, you will see that this object is UV'd the way I showed you before. Okay, so I used a automatic mapping, and I also use a layout with 10 pixels of spacing, you know, shell and tile padding. Anyway, I apply this basic material and I will go to the color here and I can plug a ramp because it's probably the fastest way to demonstrate this concept. Okay, so I will change the color here to crazy colors, okay, just to prove this concept. And if you go to the viewport and activate the textured, you will see this result. Okay, and this is happening, as I said, because of the UV mapping, the way the UVs are disposed. Okay, and the way to work with this triplanar shading is you have to go to the hypershade anyway, select the material, bring back here, and here you have your material, and here you have your texture. Doesn't matter if the texture is a procedural one like the ramp or regular texture. You just have to disconnect this thing, and you have to bring the Arnold texture AI triplanar here, and you'll see that right away that we just have to connect this guy to the out color, to the input, and this out color here to the base color. Okay, it could be also the out alpha if that's the case, but in the case out alpha and out color is going to be exactly the same. And this triplanar now is controlling the way this texture is represented on the surface of this object. Okay, we just have to select the node, we can close this thing, and right away you notice something weird. We don't have a good visual feedback. Okay, this is due to the limitation of the Maya viewport. So right now we are using viewport 2.0, but if you go to Arnold, which is going to replace this viewport by the render itself, you will be able to see the final result. So to do that, in order to see anything, you need at least one light on your scene. In this case, I'm going to use a sky dome light, and I'm going to fire the render. I can do that using this option here, and as you can see, it's rendering perfectly. Or I can go here and use the Arnold viewport itself. If I click here, you will see this small window, and if you click here, right away Maya will replace your viewport with the render. Okay, but be aware that this thing is very intensive in terms of processing. Okay, sorry. So in this case, I would like to demonstrate how this shader works. So in this case, I have the rainbow material applied, and I can go, for example, inside here, and here we have the AI triplanar, and this is the blend I was talking about. If you click and drag, you will see that instead of seeing the limits of the projection, by the way, let me show you something. If you select the objects and if the lines of the objects are, bothering you too much, you can go to show and click selection highlighting. Okay, just remember to go back, because otherwise you will not see what exactly you are selecting. So in this case here, I'm clicking on different objects. I'm selecting different objects, but I have no idea what exactly I'm selecting because there's no visual feedback. Okay, the only feedback I have is on the outliner. Okay, if I select this guy, go back to the material, go inside the first node, this is the AI triplanar, and this is the texture being controlled by the AI triplanar under the input here. Okay, so if we go back here to this guy, we can change a bunch of settings. So for example, the coordinate space is going to be the object itself. We can take this blender here, this blend variable, and blend everything. So Maya is going to try to blend and not to show you when one texture finishes and the other one starts. And if you think the scale is completely wrong, which is totally normal, you can try to work with the scale here. So for example, let's go to the rotate, because the rotate is more obvious in the sense of giving feedback or visual feedback to us on what is going on. And just so you know, you can also go back to the texture itself, and there's a very cool property here on the ramp called, instead of interpolation, instead of using linear, you can use smooth, and he's going to try to smooth the transition between one thing and another. Okay, and right away we can create a lot of crazy things with this. Okay, let's go back to the triplanar, let's put 0 here, and let's work with the scale. So for example, I would like to project this texture just in Y. So in this case, I can take this thing here and make it even smaller, not bigger. Okay, 0.01, for example, I will stretch this thing in just one direction, and as you can see, it works pretty well, right? I can also go to the other parts and copy and paste the same value just to have a different distribution, and as you can see right away we have this effect, which is cool, right? It's super interesting. So if you want to keep that, it's okay. If not, you can keep working on the scale here. You can work on the offsets as well. So for example, if you move things by unity, so this is X. Oh, let's see the axis here. So in this case, I would like to move this texture in Z, okay? Let's take X, Y, Z, Z value. I will move like 5 unities. And right away, you see that the texture is moving across the surface of the object, okay? So for example, 6, 7, 15, 25, and you see the texture is walking, okay? So if you want to scale up this texture, you can make it even smaller, and you will cover the entire object on a very easy way. And since this is a procedural texture, I don't have to worry about any stretching or anything like that. Okay, so this is a very cool tip on how to use a Arnold shader. That's something that inside the software, so you don't have to go outside and you have to invest a lot of time working on your UVs, because again, this is some sort of prototyping. Okay, we are just trying to understand if this type of texture works well with our object, and you should try this approach, okay, because it's very cool. And in some specific softwares, like for example Houdini, this is absolutely normal. Actually, this is the only way to work, okay? So that's why Arnold is so popular, because it gives a lot of freedom to the creators in the sense of allowing you to kind of bend the rules a little bit. So again, you have two choices. You can work with the UVs, or you can completely ignore the UVs and use the triplanar projection shader. Both ideas are totally acceptable. The only thing I ask you is to stick with your decision, stick with one of both, okay? And keep in mind that this thing has limitation, and the biggest limitation in this case is you don't have visual feedback on Maya's viewport, so you have to either fire up the Arnold viewport render, or you have to literally render your scene using this approach here to see the visual feedback. Okay, this is the only problem with this approach. This is not exactly a huge problem, but you know, stick with whatever you want and try to explore with this shader. When it comes to colors, there's basically two ways I like to work. One is using a website that generates palettes for me based on not only methods for generating colors, but also using other means. Like I can extract themes from photos. I can explore using a bunch of already done presets. And by the way, this is Adobe Color. You probably already used this one, but this is not the only website available to work with colors online. Okay, so if you go to the web and look like color palettes and color palette generator website, you will find like hundreds of very good websites, and they have pretty much the same things. But I would like to show you something that I usually do when I'm trying to explore colors to apply materials or whatever to my illustrations, to my 3D designs, and even to my most crazy works, okay? If you go to trends, you will find a bunch of inspirations in different areas. So for example, this is fashion, and there's a lot of skin tones here, and there's a lot of very vivid colors in some specific things. Graphic design, so this is very common for high contrast information, which is awesome if you are working on book covers, printed design, and there's also illustration. So this is something I would like to draw your attention to. If you go to view more, you will see that we have like a lot of different illustrations, and you can extract colors from this illustrations here to use on your own work. Okay, we also have the opportunity to upload an image, and from this image try to put together a bunch of other inspirations. So you can use also Dribbble. Dribbble is a very interesting website. The strongest focus of Dribbble is UI UX, but eventually you will find artists like this guy here, and he is super talented doing vector art, and I kind of like the way he works with palettes. Some of them are very explosive, and the way he draws things on very ascendant lines. So his work is super interesting and very positive on a way, and I am looking for something that I can use as a source of inspiration. So for example, I like this one very much. So I like the colors, and of course they are desaturated here a little bit, but when you go inside, you also see, besides the photo itself, you also see this option here. And when you go to the end, you will see download palette ACO. If you download this file, I will show you how to import this thing to Illustrator or Photoshop. In this case, Photoshop, just to have access to all the palettes that he's using on his work in this case, okay? But if you click on the image and make it bigger, just to be sure that you are isolating the image, sometimes I open this image on a new tab, and from here I save this image on my disk. Okay, so if you save this image, you can open up this image using Adobe Color. I already downloaded this image, and if you go back to Adobe Color, you just have to bring this image, clicking here and selecting the image, and then open here. And Adobe Color is going to try to bring you a lot of different illustrations that uses in a certain way the same type of palettes, not the same colors, but the same type of palette, the same way to generate colors. Okay, so you always have ways to generate a palette, but not exactly the same type of image. Okay, other sites will be able to extract the colors. So for example, if you go here to create extract theme, you can select the file again, and Adobe Color is going to try to select and extract the colors, the most important colors, and you can even decide which one is being generated. So he's going to read the image and see the most contrasting colors, and he's going to generate this thing here. And of course, if you save this image on your account, you have access to this thing later on. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is just one way to work. Another way, probably faster, is if you have this image in Dribbble, you can download the palette. And now I would like to jump into Photoshop and show you how to import this type of file, this ACO file. Here in Photoshop, the only thing you have to do is go to Window, Swatches, and inside Swatches you can import this color swatch. Okay, so in this case you have to click here on top of this hamburger menu, and then go to Import Swatches, and then select your ACO palette, and then click Load, and right away you will see that you have access to the things here. So if you go to File, New, let's create like a new canvas here just to test the inks. So if you select one, you can paint, and you can select another one and you can paint. And this one is super cool because I have greens, different types of greens that I can use on my environment. I'm not really sure that I'm going to literally use this thing, but anyway, it's a very interesting way to extract palettes. Okay, another way, of course, is always using Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, so you can take like a screenshot of the palettes generated by this image, and you can use on your own works. I would like to talk about something cool that you will see on my project, which is the grass. And I will cover step by step how I created this thing. And just so you know, I use the combination of Maya Paint Effects, Arnold stand-ins, and Maya Mesh. Okay, from those three here, the only one you already know is Maya Mesh. Okay, you can also use XGen. XGen is a plugin available inside Maya since a few years, and it's pretty capable of doing amazing things, including hair, including more complex things. So eventually I will show you how to use this, but be aware the topics that I'm showing here, they are off this course. They are a little bit, out of the context of this course, but I would like to show this kind of thing for most advanced students. So if you want, and if you feel comfortable experimenting, and if you want to learn a little bit more on how to combine those technologies, I think this is a very good use case, okay? If you never heard about Maya Paint Effects, Maya Paint Effects is a very powerful plugin. It's a technology that allows you to paint using curves. And from these curves, Maya generates a bunch of three-dimensional objects. So this is very useful to create things like this. This is a entirely vegetation created using Maya Paint Effects, and you can customize the brushes and you can customize the results of the brushes to create very natural, inspired looking things, but you can also create very stylized things, okay? The technology is fairly simple. It's basically a path, and on top of this path you have a randomization of objects, okay? There's some limitations with this technology. So for example, most of the plugins, the external rendering plugins, they are not capable of recognizing paint effects. But you can take the paint effect result and you can convert the paint effect into polygons. So the plugins, they can read, they can understand, and they can use this information to render beautiful things, as you can see here, okay? Then we will stumble upon another limitation, which is the amount of polygons. Sometimes you have to put a lot of things inside your scene, and they're just repetitions of objects. Okay, so to deal with this kind of thing, there is another technology that belongs to Arnold. And most of the modern renders, they have some sort of similar technology, okay? So this thing is called stand-in, okay? This is one of the many approaches that we can use to replicate a single object billions, literally billions of times on a scene without having performance issues. What I'm trying to say is, for example, the soldiers here, the green ones, they're just one object. It's just one object replicated billions of times and rotated and transformed, and they can render. And when you render this thing, actually you are rendering just one object, and then Arnold do some magic under the hood, and he's going to populate your scene with this kind of thing. So the ducks, the same things, the soldiers in the top, same thing. This image on the right, it's a huge battle. So you can create literally billions of repetitions using this technology, okay? You probably saw this thing in action. So if you saw any huge battle with millions of soldiers, millions of objects on your screen at the same time, the trick behind this type of scene is using some sort of proxy, okay? We also call this thing proxy mesh, okay? But Arnold called this thing standing. Today we have basically three types of technology capable of doing that. Arnold standing is just one of them, okay? There is this new technology inside Maya 2022 called USD. USD is a universal scene description. And it's not only inside Maya, by the way. This is a technology, this is an open source technology, and most of the most professional softwares today, they support USD. Okay, there's also a old but very, very good technology called Alembic that we can use to transfer content from one software to another. This is extremely useful to take, for example, particles from a powerful software like Houdini, bring these particles inside Maya and render inside Maya with a character animation, for example. So you can use multiple softwares inside the same pipeline. Okay, that's why I'm showing this thing. You don't have to do anything. You just have to sit there and watch me working if you don't want to try. But if you want to try, you will see the advantages right away. Okay, so let's jump into Maya and let's try to use this thing. But just so you know, I also put here a step-by-step of the things I'm going to do in order to control this grass on top of my surface. Okay, and one very important thing is I'm doing that on the original scene, not on the scene that I am using to assemble all the objects of my final island. I'm doing on the original object to avoid scale issues, because I moved objects, I scaled objects, I applied transformations on those objects, and sometimes this brings us a lot of headaches. So if you want to work with repetitions of objects on top of surfaces, I'm talking about mesh here, okay? You should be aware that working on a clean scene, the most clean possible scene, which is the original one, is probably the best idea. And the second thing that I'm going to show you here is something that you can use to control the visibility of the object on top of the mesh. And to do that, you can use a texture map. Okay, this has nothing to do with applying textures for controlling the color of the object. Okay, I asked you to not use external textures on this assignment. Okay, if you use that is absolutely up to you, but I ask you to use not most, but all of the texture as procedural textures. Okay, so let's go into Maya and let's try to see how this thing works. Here I am inside Maya, and I decided to take the scene of the island, and I save a copy of this scene called Island with Grass. Okay, it's inside the same folder. I'm not using this guy because the file that has been referenced is called island_clean. Okay, and the first thing I would like to do is I need UVs. Okay, since I don't have UVs, I had to create UVs the first time. And if you want to use certain things, certain times, you need to have UVs in order to be able to control the repetition of the object on top of the surfaces. Okay, this object is fairly low poly, so keep that in mind, because eventually we might have some issues with the fact of we don't have a lot of polygons. So if we decide to scatter something on top of this object here, we will have, like, for example, the faces. This is one face, and I will have one object here, one object here, one here, and another one here. So they will be like very far from each other. Okay, if I have more subdivisions, I can, for example, assign objects to random vertices, and the objects, they will not be like very far from each other. They will still far from each other, but not that far. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, before moving on, I want to subdivide this mesh a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to mesh, smooth. I will apply just one subdivision just to increase a little bit the amount of polygons, and this is more than enough. Please be careful with the amount of polygons that you have on your objects, okay? This guy might need also to be subdivided, but I really don't care about the ocean right now, so let's just put one subdivision, just one. This is more than enough, okay? So here we go, we have what we need. And before we move on, of course, since we created this smooth, we applied the smooth modifier to kind of multiplicate the amount of vertices and faces, we have a history. So we have to delete this history, to go to the polygon modeling, delete history, freeze transformation, just to be on the safe side. And another thing we have to do is take a look on the UV mapping. Okay, so this guy has no UV mapping, as so this other guy. So what we have to do is to create a planar mapping looking from the top. So if we project something from Y, like Y, this axis here, we will have this good starting point, I would say, because both objects, they are kind of spherical, planar, right? With just a little bit of disturbance on the surface. So to do that on a very, very easy way, I can go to the create here, planar, and hold shift and click on planar. Okay. If you reset the settings of this window here, you can see that he's using X as standard. So we want Y. We want to project this thing from Y. So just hit project, everything will be fine. And right away, we will do the same thing with the other objects. So go to the objects mode, select this guy, and we can again apply the planar. Since the settings are saved, we just have to hit apply and everything will be fine. Okay. Another thing we have to do is, if you go to the object, I would like to unfold just to be sure that everything is very well smooth. And I would also like to layout this thing, because using layout with the settings that we've been using, we are going to make the object a little bit far from the edges. Okay, I already explained this thing. You can select this guy, go to the UV shell. In this case here, you will see that we already have like a very dense mesh. So be careful when you work with this kind of thing. So the first thing we need to do is go again, not to create. Let's close this guy here. To the unfold, you can hit unfold and you see that he's going to try to relax a little bit. You can hit several times, but eventually this thing is not going to do anything else, okay? You can also optimize. Optimize is trying to get the best ratio between the smoothness of the UVs and the distortions as well. So unfold and optimize, they're very, very close, but unfold is always the first the first move on this thing. And when we do that, we just have to select the shell and we can go to the layout and everything will be fine. Okay, if you want, you can of course go to the alignment and snap and click on this button here just to be sure that the object will be perfectly centered. I mean, the UV is going to be perfectly centered, which by the way doesn't mean absolutely anything. It's just out of my obsession. I like to centralize things and I like to have this small space. It's always a good practice. Okay, so there we go. We have the UVs and everything is fine. One final thing that I'm going to check is here I'm going to UV set editor, and every single object should be just one, should have just one UV set. Okay. Eventually I will explain what this means, but if you see more than one here, you should select the others, delete. Okay. And eventually you will end up having just one. If you try to delete the last one, Maya is going to throw you an error saying, okay, I cannot delete this guy because I have information on this guy. Okay, this is the main channel and this is what we want. Okay, so don't worry about that. Everything is fine. Now we can go. Just to be on the safe side, let's go back to the general. As you can see, when we work with UVs, we can have this history here. Again, delete history, freeze transformation. If this is an obsession, yes, it is an obsession, but it's a good obsession, I think so. And we always should pay attention to that. Okay, I'm going to hide the ocean because I'm not going to use this thing right now. I'm going to take the islands and I'm going to hide the islands as well because I'm not going to use this thing right now. And if you go to the center of the screen, okay, on the crossing of the both lines here, I would like to use the tool I mentioned called paint effect. Okay, to use paint effect, we have a lot of different ways, but the easier one is going into Window and open up the content browser. This guy here have a bunch of presets in several different areas. I go straight to Paint Effects, and here you see the amount of things that we have, okay? I'm going to grasses, okay? And I kind of like this crump here, glass crump, okay? So you just have to double click on this guy, okay? And right away your cursor is going to change. As you can see, now you are using the Paint Effect tool, okay? And the Paint Effect tool allow you to paint, let's close this window here, allow you to paint whatever you want. And when you create this curve, you also create a mesh, okay? I don't want to create a curve. I don't want to create, you know, a line. A curve, it's a line, right? I don't want to create this line. I don't want to go out of the center, okay? So to be at the center, my advice is activate the Snap to Grids and click and drag. If you click and drag, you will create this. This is the grass. And this is what I want. And if you take a look at this guy, you will see that it's just very simple, flat polygons, okay? If they're flat polygons, they don't have at least one side, okay? They just have the side pointing to the normal. But this guy here is going to be invisible for Arnold, so the renders in general, they do not, they're not capable of understanding what this guy is, okay? Except the Maya software. If you try to render with Maya software, it's going to render. If you try to render with Arnold, V-Ray, whatever, you will have a lot of issues, okay? So what we have to do is we have to transform this guy into polygons, because it looks like polygon, but right now you're not seeing polygons. You're seeing like stroke, grass, clumps, whatever. This is a paint effect, okay? But before doing that, I would like to take this thing here and make it straight. And to do that, we have to go to the attribute editor, and we have to dig into the settings of the thing that we did. And there's billions of settings here, okay? I cannot spend a lot of time explaining every single one, okay? But if you go to Tubes, Creation, and inside Creation, we have most of the settings that we can tweak to make this thing bigger, smaller, thicker, whatever, okay? Just spend some time playing with the values and you see what I mean, okay? Let's go to this elevation mean and tweak to the mass and to the you know, the right extremity. Let's go to the elevation max, do the same, and now everything is fine. Okay, I kind of like this thing. Of course, there's a lot of things going, you know, far from the center. This thing is not exactly at the center, but don't worry, everything is fine. Okay, like it or not, I have a curve, and this curve, of course, you're not seeing because I didn't finish the curve. I was all the time locked on this point here. Okay, if you don't like the way this thing is, other than changing the settings, you can also draw again if you want. Okay, now it's time to convert this object to polygons, and to do that, we are going to modify, convert paint effect to polygon. Let's go to the settings, and by default we don't have this quad outputs, and this is very important because I like to work with quads all the time. Can you see everything is quads here? And I would like to keep that way. So you just have to click convert, and now this thing is a polygon, but we lost the texture. Okay, and we lost the texture because the texture originally is coming with this guy here. Okay, if you go to the attribute editor, you'll see that eventually you will find the shading, and inside the shading you have a lot of settings, and those settings actually, if you go to the hypershade, those settings actually correspond to this guy here. If you take this guy and bring, you will see that we have just a simple ramp, okay? And we can take this ramp here. I'm going to rename this thing right away because I like to rename my objects just to be organized. Since I already have a lot of textures on my computer, on my project, I would like to avoid confusion in the future. So I'm going to take this thing here and delete. And I'm going, of course, to Arnold, and I will create a shader, like AI standard shader, okay? This will be my grass matte, grass underscore matte, and I'll take the alt color and I'll put on the base color. I can delete this thing here that I don't need anymore. And this is the grass mat. This is the ramp that is going inside. And if you want to see this thing, just have to turn this thing a little bit and you will see that we have this gradient from brown niche color to green color. Another thing I would like to do, and this is very important, okay, I'm going to tweak the reflections here. I don't want this thing very reflective because I'm going to repeat this object with this material thousands of times. And if I have reflections everywhere, this would be a little bit painful to render, okay? I can also tweak the material here. So if you select any point here, you can even add more points if you want, okay? If you click on the middle, for example, you can add like a pink thing and you will have like a alien material. Of course, this is kind of weird, so please try to avoid this kind of thing unless you really want to do that. So I'm just going to select this color here and I'm going to tweak towards, you know, the beginning to make it a little bit more green, okay? Again, make sure that you don't have any specularity and a lot of roughness because I don't want reflections on my grass. Okay, more reflection means more render time. I'm trying to avoid this kind of thing as much as I can. So I'm going to take this material here and I'm going to apply to this puppy, okay, to the mesh itself. If you see inside the group, you see that this is the mesh. So let's delete this group here. You just have to ungroup. And this is grass clump, okay? I don't need this thing anymore. I can delete. I don't need this thing anymore. We just have to select this guy, which by the way has no material. That's why this greenish crazy color, because this guy is completely disconnected from any shader group and therefore any material, okay? So we just have to right click, assign existing material and then grass matte. And there we go. We have the material applied, but of course we're not seeing because we have to activate this option here. And as you can see, now it's working. If we try to render this guy, you will see that it's going to render. Let's go to our node and let's bring like a sky dome and let's try to render. And right away you see that the object is rendering perfectly, okay? You can also make adjustments on this object in the sense of, for example, oh, I don't like to have this. You can delete this. This is okay. This, and you can delete parts if you want. Okay, so if you do that, of course, you're going to lose a little bit of radius, but this is just to make this grass clump a little bit beautiful. Okay. Another thing I would like to do is, if you go to the pivot point, you see that the pivot point is at the center, but not on the center of the object itself. So what we are going to do here is to center the pivot, okay? And we are going to edit the pivot and we're going to make this thing down a little bit. Be careful, the snap is still activated. I hate to use this thing because it's always activated. That's why I like to use shortcuts. And I'm going to push this thing a little bit up, little bit, okay? Little bit. Just to put the base of the grasses inside the ground. Okay, so I think this is more or less in the middle. We can go outside of the edit pivot mode and we can activate the snap to grids and then bring this guy to the middle. This is what we want, okay? And this guy is, if you see here from the side, this guy is a little bit inside the ground, okay? And this is exactly what I want. So now we have to delete the history, freeze the transformations, everything is fine. Just to guarantee that we always have a very clean scene. What I mean by clean scene is if you go here to the outliner display DAG object only, you see everything that is inside your scene, okay? Eventually you also see things that you are not using, like materials that you are not using. Please do not delete the nodes that you are not using just because you're not using, okay? Most of the nodes here, they are controlled by Maya, and they, you will break your file if you start deleting things randomly. Okay, so be careful with that. That's why usually we have this DAG object only selected, just to avoid seeing too much. Sometimes I go there and I disable this thing to see a little bit more. But anyway, if you want to clean your scene without having the problem of, breaking your scene, you can go to File, Optimize Scene Size. Okay, so now I don't have any materials that I'm not using. I don't have any objects that I'm not using. Everything is fine and I can move on. So what I'm going to do is I already rename, I have a material, everything is zeroed out, the pivot point is on the ground. Now I'm going to create a stand-in from this object. To do that, we have to go to our node and then scene export. And as I said, we have as the file extension is exactly that. So sorry, it's a joke from the guys from Arnold. Okay, it's a very old format file, very, very, very solid one. We have Alembic, which is a new format. It's been around for a few years and I use a lot, mainly for animations. Okay, and we have USD, which is absolutely new inside this version of Maya, and right now is supported by the giants of the computer graphic industry. Okay, so you can use USD to export objects and import objects and work with billions of objects simultaneously. Okay, I am very used to the stand-in that uses the as file. So this is a R node only format. Alembic and USD are universal formats. Okay, so I would like to export the selection, the object I selected, right? The selection to as. That's it. Just have to do that and give a name. So this is grass clump. Okay, and we are going to export this guy, and this guy is going to be saved in the scenes file. And there we go. Okay, we don't even need to see this object in the scene anymore because we already exported this object on a format that is extremely optimized to work with Arnold. Okay, how to bring this thing back? We have to go to Arnold and then click on stand in. If you go to the option box, he's going to open up the file for you to select the file, and you just have to load. And if you're seeing this, this is exactly your mesh. You're not seeing your mesh, but if you try to render, you will see right away the mesh is there. And we can take this guy here and we can multiply this guy billions of times, and this is going to be extremely efficient for Arnold. Okay, Arnold will be render this thing without any problems because this is a very professional workflow. Okay, so how to use this thing on our scene? So first of all, let's bring the island because we want to create a mesh out of this puppy here. Okay, so this guy here, let's rename this. So it's going to be grass stand in. Okay, I'm going to always save the scene every time I do something. But to create this mesh network, I would like to do this on a different way. So I'm going to select this guy. I'm going to effects or animation, doesn't matter. The mesh menu, and instead of just clicking here, which by the way is the same thing of going to the mesh tab and click here. I don't want to do that. Okay, I want to go to the options. So go to the options first. And here I will select first instancer. By the way, if you reset this thing, by default, you create meshes, okay? I don't want to do that. I want to create instance. This is again, very, very, very optimized way to work with this type of repeating object, okay? I'm going to create this instancer and I'm going to apply and close. There we go. We created this guy and it's a fully functional right now. So if you try to render, you will see that Arnold is going to render this thing very, very fast, which is simple, right? There's just a few of them, just 10 copies. That doesn't mean anything. But when we multiply this thing on the scene, you will see what I mean by power. Okay, so let's bring the island back. Let's go to the mesh node. Let's go to the top here. So mesh underscore grass. Okay, so in this case, I want to do that because, again, it's a way to work on a very organized way. Okay, so this mesh grass here is going to generate a bunch of grass for us. So in this case, I would like to go to the distribution. And instead of linear, I would like to use a mesh. Okay, and we need the mesh here. So to do that, we are going to take the island here and drag with the middle mouse button and release here, and voila. Right away, you will see this thing happening. Okay, if you really want to see more, if you really want to see more grass, you have to use this option float, or you have to take this number here and like multiply this thing like crazy. If you do that, you will see literally this scattering happening on your scene. Okay, if you want to render this thing, just to make sure that everything is working, again, save your scene and then render. Arnold is going to call this object once and is going to render extremely fast. Okay, I have a good machine. My machine is super cool, it's good. That's why it's rendering so fast, right? Yeah, not quite. So there's also the technology here, and the technology allows us to do this kind of thing. So if you want even more, you can do that. So how to control the amount of objects that we have on our island? So there's two ways to do that. The first one is we can work with the mesh node. So by the way, I advise you to use a random. Okay, so if you use the, what is the random? Yes, random here. You use a random, but not to randomize the position. Okay, so I don't want, for example, to randomize the position in Y, because if I do that, I'm going to take the object out of the surface. Okay, I can randomize in Z. Let's see, it's up close here. I can randomize this thing in Z. I can randomize this thing in X, just to, again, have a better a random distribution of the objects, and always try to render. So if you render this guy, you will see that now we have a better natural looking distribution, because the things are literally randomized, and you can randomize even further. You can randomize the scale of the object. Okay, so for example, you can randomize the scale in Y, which is probably, actually it's a good idea to put the same values everywhere. So 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, and you can have literally a randomized scale of object, and you can create pretty natural looking grass using that. Of course, we have to control where the grass appear, and this is the next step. Okay, to do that, you can go to the mesh node and you can use a visibility. Okay, this visibility node here allows you to use several different approaches to control the scattering of the objects on the surface. I would like to start with this fall off object here. The fall off object, you just have to right click here and create a fall off object. And right away, you will notice that we have this new object on your outline. Okay. And this new object, you can literally move. Let's disable the snap. Okay. You can literally move and you will see grass only where this object is. Okay, so be careful while I move this thing on the perspective. Try to use something like this. Okay, and you can make it bigger, smaller. You can tweak the inner zone. You can do a lot of things with this guy, and it's a pretty interesting way to concentrate things on certain places. By the way, if you select this guy instead of just the visibility node, if you select just this guy here, you can change from sphere to cube. You can change to NURBS curves, but I have no idea how this thing works. I never used NURBS curves. You can invert the fall off. Okay, if you invert the fall off, so let's see a sphere. Okay, so let's suppose that I want to see grass everywhere. everywhere but here on the top. Okay, if that's the case, you can invert the fall off to have something like this. Okay, it's a pretty interesting visual feedback. Again, save the scene and try to render, and you see right away that you can render in real time with Arnold. Of course, it depends on the machine. Okay, I'm not going to generalize this thing because this is not exactly the same on every single computer. But this is not exactly the best way to deal with that. The best possible way to deal with this kind of thing is always telling to Maya where you want to see objects using a texture. Okay, and this texture has nothing to do with the appearance of the objects. This is a texture, a black and white texture that we use to control where the objects are placed. Okay, so how to deal with this texture, how to work with this type of texture. So first of all, we need to create a texture. Okay, and to create this texture, it's fairly simple. We can do this inside Maya. That's why I created UVs, because I want to demonstrate this thing. So let's go to the visibility here, right click on this guy and break connections. Okay, if you break the connections, this guy is over and you can just delete this fall off thing here. Okay, of course there's a lot of other types of fall off. So you can use mesh object, for example. You can have another version of this island just with the top part. And on this top part here is the place where you want to see grasses. But again, I would like to show you a very professional way of dealing with that, which is using textures. Okay, I'm going to disable everything here, and I'm going to take this guy. And right now, just so you know, I'm using Lambert 1. Okay, we are going to create a material, new material. So assign a new material. In this case, I want a material that I can see on the screen. If that's the case, I could use the Arnold AI standard, but some features of the AI standard are not possible to, give me feedback on the screen, on the viewport. And this is the same with any external renders, and Arnold is a external render. It's very well integrated with Maya, but it's still a external render. So I'm going to use a Lambert. Okay, Lambert is very simple. So this is paint, matte, delete, later. Okay, this is a small reminder to myself, so I have to delete this thing later on. And how to work with textures inside Maya, how to use Maya to paint textures. Okay, first of all, let's go back to the viewport 2.0. Let's save this scene. Let's close this guy just to have a little bit of space here. And let's also go to show and selection highlights. I don't want to see the selection. I want to select the object, but not see the selection highlights in this case. Okay, so I selected the island. You can see that the island is selected here on the outliner. You can right mouse button and you can go to paint, 3D paint. Okay, when you go to 3D paint, Maya is going to tell you that, let's open up this thing here. Maya always gives you feedback. Most of the time the feedback is not very comprehensible if you don't have prior experience with Maya. But anyway, warning, the file blah 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 blah. Some surfaces have no file texture assigned. This is exactly what we are trying to do. We are going to create a texture to paint black and white on top of this guy. And this black and white is going to define exactly what I want, where I want to see grass. Okay, so in this case, we have to create assign edit texture like this. Okay, this is the first thing, assign. And I'm going to use this size here, 2K, because I've been using 2K so far. And the format file, you can use any bitmap file. Please try to avoid crazy file formats. Okay, there's a lot of exotic file formats here. Try to avoid those. Okay, my suggestion is stick with TGA. It's going to generate a huge map but the quality of this map is awesome. So you can use this thing on Photoshop to make further edits and change things, okay? Try to avoid PSD, try to avoid other types. If you want, my advice for you, again, PNG, TGA, it's extremely professional, or let me see, what else we have. We have the TIFF format as well. So I always use a TGA on my personal projects. Okay, so let's assign the texture. And now we have a material with a texture. So every time we do anything here, as you can see, we have this brush that we can paint. I'm not painting anything. I'm not clicking on anything yet, because the first thing I would like to do is flood my mesh with some color. Okay, I will paint this thing inverted just to see the slopes, just to see the curves of my mesh, because if I paint everything black, I will not see anything. So let's try. If you flood paint, flood is literally, I'm going to paint everything with just this color here, okay? So for example, if I put red and decide to flood paint, he's going to paint the entire object with that color, okay? So in this case, I would like to flood with white, okay? This is exactly what I want. And try to remember that. We want a black and white texture, okay? So let's flood paint with white. And now we are going to paint black the parts we want to see grass. Remember what I'm trying to say. I am painting on a inversed way. If you want, you can paint everything black, and then you can paint white on the parts where you're going to see grass, okay? I'm just painting everything white just to see the slopes, just to see the shapes a little bit better, and then I will probably invert this entire texture, okay? Let's see if this thing is possible, because you can invert this thing using, for example, Photoshop, so you don't have to worry too much about this, okay? But the ideal thing is paint everything black and paint white on the parts you want to see objects, because this is the way Maya is going to work, okay? So let's try to do that. It's going to be very challenging, but I'll try to do that. So let's flood with black. As you can see, I have nothing on my screen basically. Now I'm going to the color and I'm going to paint white, because white is exactly the parts where I want to see my grass. Oh, sorry, there's something wrong here. Yeah, I have to paint white. So let's flood again with black. Okay, just restart. And let's paint with white. By the way, he was painting with the same brush I selected before. That's why this thing was wrong. So you have to use the paints, the brushes here on the top, okay? So mostly this first one and the second one. And you have some operations: paint, erase, clone, you have smear, you have blur, okay? Let's try to keep things simple, because those tools, they're very, very limited, okay? But we can do a lot of things with that. So let's paint white. Okay. You can paint more, and then you can come back and you can change things. Okay, I'm just painting everywhere. Of course, this is not exactly right. Now I can go back and I can paint black where I don't want to see things. So for example, I can paint black here because I don't want to see things there, right? I just want to see grass on the top. I don't want to see around. And of course you can do pretty much whatever you want. So this is just the process. This is just a way to do that. I'm just focusing on the procedure to finish this thing. So I keep painting, and I think this is a good point, okay? My suggestion is we need to blur the edges as well. Okay, to blur the edges, you have to click on blur. You can go to the blur intensity here just to make this thing bigger. If you want the brush bigger, you can make it bigger here, or you can hold B, click and drag to make it bigger. Okay, so if you do that, you will have these gray areas around, And the gray areas, they are not going to have a lot of grass because again, it's black and white. And the distribution is based on the color of the pixels. Okay, gray areas tend to have less objects. So let's suppose that this is what I want. Okay, I'm going to show you where this thing is saved because Maya told us always where he is saving things. So let's make this thing a little bit small, like this, and let's save the texture. When you save the texture, Maya is going to tell you, okay, this is island with grass, which is the name of the project. Okay, this thing is inside source images 3D paint textures, island with grass with color. Okay, let me show you where this thing lies on the computer. And we are also going to open up this thing in Photoshop because I have to show you how this texture behaves inside Photoshop. As you can see, this is the place where Maya saved the texture. And we have the texture here and it's pretty big, 16 megabytes. And again, if you want to use TGA format, you can use. If you want to use JPEG, you can use. But my advice is if you're doing your professional work, try to stick with a professional file extension. Okay, so in this case, I have the island shape, which is the shape of the object where I put this texture. If I open up this thing, you will see that inside Photoshop, this texture is just a black and white texture. And I can even go further and I can do edits here if I want. I just have to, I don't know, take the brush here and I can paint some parts and I can do a lot of things. Okay, so this texture can be edited here. You just have to edit and then go to File, Save, and inside Maya you can reload the texture. Okay, but let's use this texture now to define where we want to see grass. Okay, let's go back to Maya and I will show you how this thing works. Okay, we are back and I will go out of this paint tool and we have a material applied to this guy. I don't want this material anymore because I already generated the texture, so I really don't care. By the way, if you want to go straight to the material, right mouse button, go to material attributes. Okay, and you will see that we have this paint, matte, delete me later, and we have this color here. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to break the connection. Okay, and we are going to apply apply another type of material on my scene, the scene where I am assembling things. Okay, and this material is already done, so I don't have to do it again. Okay, so in this case, I am going to mesh, and I'm going to activate mesh, and you see that very fast everything is there. We can go to the grass visibility and we can use this strength map here. We just have to click on this guy, connect a file, one click, okay, and we have to give the texture that we created. In this case, source images, 3D paint, island glass, and this TGA here. And when we use that right away, you can see the effect happening. Of course, it requires adjustments. Okay, we should change the position of the things, but just so you know, this is basically the way I did this, you know, this grass, and the way I work with grass. And if you want even more objects on your scene, you can have it. Okay, since everything here is procedural, everything here works on a very fast pace, we can go to the mesh node here, and we can go to the mesh distribute, and we can increase the amount of objects. Okay, and we can use this type of thing to kind of have a very good disposition of objects on top of our mesh. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good result. You can randomize even more if you want. You can randomize this thing in Y and Z just to make it bigger or smaller. So for example, on the random here, I was using like 0.2. I can use like 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. Okay, so this is going to randomize even more the distribution, and there we go. I think this is enough for this video. This is my final scene, and I would like to briefly describe what I have here. So first of all, I created this base globe here. I might use you know, the idea of a globe around. I didn't decide yet, but I have this terrain, and looks like that I'm using like external texture. Let me uncheck this thing here. Selection highlight. So now you can see clearly something. So this is not exactly a external texture. This is a procedural texture. The only thing I did with this terrain was to create a UV mapping, a planar UV mapping using X projection in this direction, and I'm using a very simple ramp texture to project this thing. So this ramp is a little bit weird here. It's not weird, actually, it's a little bit different, because if I go to the hypershade and bring the texture of this object here, so if you select the object, in this case I'm selecting the island, you just have to right mouse button here and then grab selected object. And I would like to show you what I have here exactly. So I have this ramp here, okay, and if you select the colors here, you can change the colors, but you can also besides changing the color, you can insert textures on this object here. So if you click here, you have access to this property and you can plug things here. So the only thing I did was to take this greenish part here, the green, the most green part that you can see here, and I plugged a texture. Okay, it's a noise texture. So it's not complicated. Okay, the only thing I did was to add a little bit of information, and you can go and you can do this with pretty much every single node that allows you to plug things, but I usually go to the color and I plug something else just to have more information. I could do the same thing with this brightest part here, just to put a little bit of information. And just so you know, when you click here, you have access to a lot of things, and besides those textures here, those textures, they belong to Maya. Okay, so the 2D texture are the 2D textures, sorry, they are most of them are fully supported by Arnold, but some 3D textures are not fully supported. Okay, but if you go to Arnold texture, you will see that inside Arnold texture we have AI noise and this AI cell noise. Okay, if you want, you can add this thing here, okay, and you can play with the values. The only thing is the AI noise do not have a procedural 2D texture UV coords, because the coordinates of this guy they are already inside the node. Okay, this is a good thing. The bad thing is this guy doesn't give you a visual feedback if you try to use the hardware view, but if you use Arnold, you can have it. Okay, it's not working here. You are seeing this red thing because I am probably using Arnold already on the viewport. So I have to go back to the viewport 2.0, and if I go back to my hypershade, Arnold is going to work here on the hypershade, because in this case we can only operate with one instance at a time. Okay, and of course that is is going to throw an error, but this is minimal. Okay, so as you can see, this noise texture, you can configure this thing, you can configure the colors to change the aspects of the texture, and you will see some small differences here. So you can play with this, just you know, you can try to work with similar colors, just to have a little bit of variation. Okay, so this AI noise is a little bit different than the regular noise. It's more powerful, but the visual feedback is not good. Okay, so this was basically what I did in terms of shader here. And the final result, as a final result, we have something like this. Okay, again, it's something very stylized, so I don't care too much about the color of the water. The water, it's a very reflective kind of a plastic. If I use water or if I use a transparent material here, I will see things that I don't like to see. Okay, so that's why I'm using this material that looks like ink, more ink than anything else. So another way we, just so you know, another way to work with that cell texture is, going to the viewport, selecting the object that has the texture, of course, going to the material itself. If you have too much things here and you have no idea where is the material, so you just have to select the object, right click, and then go to material attributes, and you jump straight to the material. Go inside, look to the place where you plug, so it's probably this black one, because that's why this thing is not showing on a regular viewport, because this is a Maya node. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. So you just have to select, go inside, and here you can tweak the parameters, and you will see the feedback right away. Okay, so you have the settings here that you can use just to have something more interesting, something more close to sand, I would say. So you can change the colors of this object. I would use something more toward this yellow, something brown, I'm not sure. Anyway, we don't have to put a lot of effort on this, so the idea is to have something like this. Okay, there's a lot of other settings as well that you can change. So octaves, you can change the a lot of settings here that can change the way the texture behaves. So the amplitude is basically the difference between the colors. Okay, so if you want less difference, which might be a good thing, okay, you can. But this is basically the way I did the texturing here, just using procedural nodes. And I already explained how I worked with grass to create this grass and to scatter the grass around the entire terrain. It's a very, very interesting, but at the same time, a very basic approach. Okay, so you can try to do the same. I'm using a lot of procedural nodes, so I'm not sure, for example, if this color is okay, because since I have the green on the grass, I could go to this color here, just select the object. By the way, this is the same color that I'm using on the tower and at the walls of the small house. Okay, I think this is not exactly very good, so I'm also using a noise, and you can go to the color and you can tweak the colors, and you can kind of change the amplitude a little bit just to see how this thing behaves. So for example, the second color here should be a little more desaturated, and I don't want to make it super dark. You can work with density, the randomness. As you can see, some tweaks that we do here, they kind of change the overall look of the thing. Okay, so if you change the scale to something bigger, you will see this repetition happening over and over and over, and this value scale is going to multiply this texture on a tile sense. Okay, so 1 or 0.5 is going to do like big, really huge spots, which might be good, might not be good. It depends on what you are trying to do. Okay, so what I have in terms of scene is basically that. Just so you know, I also apply different type of material on this guy here. So let me show you exactly what I'm doing. This is a light bulb matte. It's basically a material with emission. So if you go to this value here and crank it up this thing, you will see that this material is going to try to illuminate the scene. Okay, it's a little bit complicated to deal with this type of material because usually we have a lot of noise and we have to deal with the noise later on. Okay, what I tend to do is there is always a limit for the efficiency of this type of material. So I tend to work with not so you know, extreme values here. So I'm trying to use like a little bit of white here, and we can do a lot of things on post-production, so I don't care too much about those things. Okay, we already have all the textures, and as I said, most of the things, actually not most of the things, but every single place that you see any variation, like the woods here and so on, I am using something procedural. Okay, I also used a little bit of noise on the metals as well. So let me see if I can, yeah, I can round this thing a little bit more. And I think this is a pretty good result. I'm not sure if there's something else that I can show. So in some specific cases, or for example, the rocks here, I plugged straight on the color, I plugged a noise, a AI cell noise. Okay, so this is a noise texture from Arnold. And this is good because this completely ignores the UV of the material. Okay, so I am ready to start preparing the render. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create cameras, and I'm going to explain the way I usually create cameras, and then lights, and then I'm going to work with every single light independently, and finally I will show you how to optimize the scene and how to render. Something very important to mention is the fact that you are seeing the way I work with the objects here. They're all external files. Okay, so every single part of my scene I created separately, and most of the things that I create separately I put inside groups on the original files, just to have this organization here. Because if for example I want to select this guy here, and if I need to hide this object, I just have to hide the entire group, and all the objects inside this group is going to be hidden. So doing that, my life is going to be a little bit easier, and I can do this thing with a lot of speed. Okay, and let me show you how this thing works. If we go to File and Reference Editor, you will see that I have all the files here as external files, and I am calling all those files to this project. Okay, so for example, I have the lighthouse. I can load and unload from my scene if I need. So if I do something inside this file, let's suppose that I did any change inside this file, I just have to click on the guy and click on this button here to reload a reference file. If I reload the reference file, Maya is going to read the entire file again and see if I did something else on this file, and is going to use the same file, of course, the same .ma or MB file, whatever file you are working. Okay, so basically this is the way I work with references, because if I want, I can disable everything, and the only things you are seeing here on my scene are copies of objects that are coming from external sources. So for example, I did a bunch of copies of objects here, so those are just the copies, but they are when I hide, like when I disable the object, Maya is going to create this node here called foster parent. Okay, this is like a container for the original objects, and those objects, they were created on this file. Okay, So they are like now, they don't have a parent. So that's why this guy here is waiting you to bring this file tree. So if you go here and activate the trees, automatically Maya replaces that foster node by the entire group from the original file. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is very important to keep the organization of things. So let me bring everything back, and there you go. We have all the objects, and now I can work with the cameras, with the lighting, and with the rendering. When I work with the lighting process, I like to work with 2 monitors, because if I do that, I have more space to move certain windows, for example, the Arnold render window, to a new monitor, and I can do the things I need to do on this monitor and just see the results on the other side. And this is very convenient, but since I don't have this option and I just have 1 monitor, and most of you are working with just 1 monitor, I would like to show you a very interesting way to work. Okay, this might work for most of you, maybe not all of you, but just so you know, I have here my camera view. This is my perspective view, so I can go to the shots, and here I have something called light editor. Okay, let me show you how this thing works. To be honest, I would like to start all over again. If you go to the general here, and you can reset the workspace. Okay, I already have a bunch of cameras here. All the cameras are locked, and I just have to change from camera to, you know, see exactly what I want and render exactly what I expect. But just so you know how this thing works in my case, I have 2 options to work with lights. Okay, basically I have window, rendering editors, light editor. I love this thing. Okay, and I also have Arnold, utilities, light manager. Those 2 guys, they do exactly the same, but this one from Arnold is more light, I would say. So we can create the lights here, and you can tweak the lights down on this part. Okay, you have access. So for example, I'm going to create a sky dome. Right now I have absolutely nothing on my scene. I'm going to start with a sky dome light. Okay, and right away you see that I have access to the properties of the sky dome light here on the light manager. This is Arnold. Okay, and here on the light editor, this is Maya. This is native Maya. Okay, I prefer to work with this because here I have way more features than I have using the Arnold native light manager. Okay, but this guy also has some advantages. So for example, if I create several lights, I can go to the exposure here, just use sliders and have very fast feedback, and I can change the samples here on a very fast pace, and I can enable or disable the lights, just selecting the light and trying to, you know, tweak the light and tweak the colors and so on. But there's a lot of limitations on this window. That's why I don't like to use this thing very much. So I will close this thing and I will stick with this window here. The problem is this window have the light editor and also the property editor, which by the way is a very interesting version, very compact version of the attribute editor. We have more things here than we have here. Okay, you can choose to use whatever you want, but it's faster to work with the light editor like this. Okay, you can pile this thing down if you want. You just have to move to the bottom part of the window, and you can try to squeeze this window, I don't know, maybe here, for example, and you have access to the lights and to the objects here. By the way, let's delete those lights. I'm just selected and deleted. Okay, I'm going to use this sky dome anyway, so let's let the guy live there. By the way, you can make it bigger. Okay, you can make it bigger, but you cannot make smaller. This is a problem with this window. Okay, and you have the property editor. This is the property editor, and you can open up this guy as a independent window like this. If you close, you can open up very fast, and you can, if you want, squeeze down there. Okay, but sometimes you have to rearrange the panes to make it work. Okay, oh, you can also work like this. So let's make both outside. You can take this guy here and you can move to the top, but like, let me see, not like this. I don't want to do like this. I want to do something a little bit different, okay? So for example, if I put this guy, no, sorry, this one. If I put this guy here, I could take this guy here and transform on a pane if I release here. So I will have 2 panes here to edit my lights, okay? That could be an option, but sometimes you have you need to have access to those settings on a fast pace, okay? So that's why I advise you to first detach both, then take this guy here, connect down, and you will have this big window here, and take this big window and squeeze here, okay? But since we don't have a lot of space, oh, by the way, if you want, you can also move both like this, and you can try to squeeze on this side. Maybe that would be like a better idea. So let me try to make this smaller, and let's try to squeeze this here, okay? So as you can see, I already consumed like half of the real estate space of my screen, you know? If you click here on the attribute editor, you can kind of close this guy for a moment and you can just work with this and the viewport. That might be a good idea, okay? You don't need to see this guy all the time because you already have the materials unless you want to select things, but you can also select on the viewport if that's the case. By the way, you're not seeing anything selected right now because I deactivated this option called selection highlight, okay? So if you disable the selection highlight, we're not going to see what is selected, but you still have the thing selected anyway. So let's go to show and disable this thing, and I will take the by the way, if you want, you can fit other objects here, okay? So for example, there's a lot of saved layouts with different panes and different things here. You can try to squeeze other panels here. Sometimes this might be a good idea, sometimes not, so it depends on who is using this thing, okay? So I prefer not to do that. So if you want, you can use the viewport as a render view. So in that case, since we don't have 2 monitors, I will do that. So let's go to perspective, come shot 5, and now if I want to render this guy, I'm going to go to Arnold here, and I will use the entire viewport as my render view. Okay, so this is a little bit complicated for some people if you don't have a lot of memory, if you don't have, you know, ways to render this thing with some sort of efficiency. But it's also good to try if you have a good computer, so you can try to do the same. Okay, if you don't want to work like that, another option would be go to the perspective itself. Okay, go to viewport 2.0. You should close this guy here. You should bring Arnold render view like this, and you can squeeze the Arnold render view like here on this side. Okay, but keep in mind that you will not have a lot of flexibility if you do that, but anyway, this might be an idea. Okay, so if you try to open up the outliner, you see right away that the real estate space is going to be even smaller. Okay, so this is why I usually prefer to work with 2 monitors, but if I don't have this option, at least you can try to work like this. So this is a not so comfortable way to work, but it you know, it's more than enough. To be very honest, we don't need more than that. Okay, you just have to focus on the task, and the task right now is to work on the lighting. And the first light I would like to tweak is this one. Okay, first of all, we have a bunch of settings here. We have like exposure. Let's zero out the exposure. This is the basic settings of this guy. If you want to delete it and create a new one, and very brand new one, those are the basic settings. Okay, If you fire the window right now, just make sure that you are seeing the right camera. So in this case, I would like to work with camera shape 5. Okay, you just have to change the camera and then change back again, and everything will be fine. Okay, I think this is faster than using the viewport as a render view. Mostly if you don't have a good computer, okay, this is going to give you a better feedback. So this sky dome, I can tweak the intensity to shoot more light, but I'm not sure if this is a good idea. So I'm going to color here, and I'm going to plug a texture that I brought from this website called Polyhaven. So you can access the Polyhaven website as I did. And inside this website, we have a bunch of HDR images, and I downloaded a image on 2K size and HDR format. Okay, those are the only things I did, and then I brought this texture inside my project, and now I can plug this file to my to my HDR image. You just have to select the image, click here to go inside, and as you can see, sometimes he brings the attribute editor and makes everything even smaller. It's a little bit painful. So anyway, let's go inside this guy. Let's take the file. Let's bring the HDR here. This guy here is going to be recognized as raw image. Okay, anyway, this is going to be a raw image already. Okay, if you don't like the position of the sun, so let's suppose that you are not very happy with the way Arnold is rendering this the sun here. So there's light on this side and there's shadow on this side. If that's the case, you just have to take this object here and you can rotate. If you rotate, you will rotate the entire HDR and you can have like a different render. So let's suppose that this is, I don't know, the most important thing. And I think this is a good thing because we can generate shadows for example, this object here. So this eventually might be interesting to help to tell this story. Of course, the very bright sun or sunny sky doesn't make a lot of sense with the color of the objects here. So to be very honest, we don't have to see the sun because right now we don't even have alpha because this is HDR sky is blocking everything on my screen. So what I have to do, attribute editor with the light selected, okay, go to the visibility and on the camera you can tweak this thing down. Okay, now we have a fully transparent with alpha image. So when I render this image, everything will be fine. Okay, so if you want to use HDR images, you can, of course, because it's really good for the reflections, but sometimes this might not be good for several other reasons. So let's change the camera here to I'm not sure, another camera. Okay, again, this is a stylized render. Okay, we don't have to. Let's go to the perspective here just to see how the shadows are operating. Can you see the shadows are rendering fine, I guess? I see shadows everywhere, which is important also to tell this story. Oops, too much. And when we don't have like a good space to move the camera, this type of thing can happen, okay? So let's hide the attribute editor just to have a little bit of room here to work. As you can see, when I use this HDR, my rocks, they change the color. My objects are extremely bright, okay? Something we can do is we can work on the exposure a little bit because since this is a high dynamic image, I can change the brightness of the pixels, okay? And I can have a different type of lighting. Just so you know, using HDR is going to give you these beautiful reflections, okay? The reflections, of course, are coming from the environment because this thing is reflecting the environment, but this object is also reflecting the ATTR and the brightest points on the ATTR. Okay, so if I were like very close to this object, if you notice that we have a huge range of colors, we have beautiful colors actually painting my scene. I kind of like this yellowish thing, so of course I can treat this on Photoshop. I can make less saturated, more saturated, but I'm pretty happy with the effect. Okay, and that is one possible way to work with lighting. Okay, of course my scene is a little bit dull, so I don't have a lot of shadows. I don't have a lot of things I would like to have. But if you think, for example, that the shadows are super strong here, let's suppose that this is something that is bothering you. We can do a lot of things since we're talking about stylization or very stylized scene. Let me show you something cool. I'm going to reset this entire thing since I already worked with this light. Okay, I'm going to reset this thing. So let's stop this render for a minute. And let's reset current workspace. Now, if I try to use this render view as my entire render, it will be very clear that I'm not sure if the shadows are okay. So if you select the light, go to the attribute editor, something you can do is work on the shadows. So if you make the shadows a little bit brighter, that might be good for reading the entire scene. Okay, this is not exactly the best way of working like that, but it's probably a good way for solving problems. Okay, just in case you want something, again, very stylized but rendering very fast, you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about changing things. Okay, if you change the intensity, you have like literally less light, overall light. So in this case, I have some emissive materials here, as I said before. You can tweak the light to have more or less light. If you want, you can construct your light solution step by step. In that case, I would like to explain how to do that next. Another way to work with lighting is to completely ignore the ATTR files, because they already have all the lighting ready, so you just have to use. Okay, the problem is sometimes I don't like the color, sometimes I don't like the position of the shadow, I have to rotate the objects, I have to do a lot of tweaks, so I don't like to do that sometimes. And I like to start with a very clean rendering scene. So to do that, I'm going to, again, Arnold, I'm going to create this area light, and this is going to be, I don't know, 1.25 as intensity. Something very important to know, the resolution is related with the size of the image that you use on the color, okay? You have to be very careful because this resolution is related also to the quality of the reflections that you have on your scene. This value here, 1000, is the default value of this setting, and you have to be very careful to not tweak too much this thing. When you need to do like very ultra resolution renders, very close to the subject, I suggest you to use the same value as the size of the file that you bring to this color setting. So if the file is 2K, you should use 2K. If the file is 4K, you should use 4K. But the only problem of having this value here, you know, super high, is that you are going to have more time for Arnold to start to render. Okay, the render is going to delay a little bit because he have to process the image according to this value. Okay, so try not to go far from this. Only if you really need very high resolution reflection. So in this case, I'm going to camera here. I'm going to put this thing down. And of course you can hide this object to, you know, from many other things, but if that's not your intention, you don't have to worry too much about that. So what I'm going to do is, I want this light to not work with reflections. I don't want this light to affect a specular, SSS, indirect as well, or volumes. Okay, so the only thing I want is diffuse color. If I try to, let's save the scene and let's fire this render. If I try to render, you will notice that the scene is absolutely flat. Okay, but it's illuminated. Okay, so we don't have shadows, for example. We don't have, okay, because this light is not affecting anything. And I explicitly said that. So what I have to do in this case is to add lights to do the things I want the lights to do. So in this case, I would like to add a light. Let's go to create light, and let's use a directional light. So in this case, the directional light doesn't matter the position of this light on the scene. So this light can be anywhere, doesn't matter the scale of the lights as well. So you can make like huge like this, doesn't matter. Okay, the only thing that matters is the rotation of the light, because this information is the only information that matters, of course, other than the other informations like the intensity and so on. But you never change this information here. You should go to R-Node, and R-Node is going to take care of this light from now on. Okay, so what we have to do is, again, fire the render to see the result of the thing. And now you can tweak this light to see the result. So for example, we want this light to be, you know, you can use color temperature if you want. You can take the exposure here. Right now we are not seeing anything, but you can take the exposure. When we put 1 on the exposure, let's see, 0, 0, you see almost no light at all. Okay, if you have any doubts that if this light is really working, you just have to move this light on the scene to see the result. Okay, so right now this light is giving us a lot of information, including shadows. Okay, so sometimes you don't realize the shadows on the object right away, which is perfectly normal due to the angle of the light and so on. If you want, you can reduce the size, but if you reduce the size, it's not going to affect the light at all. Okay, so this is just an indication on how this thing is going to work. Okay, right now we have this type of shadow. I would like to constrain the shadow to my space here. I don't want to see this shadow going far from my area. Okay, and if you don't like to see this light here influencing the reflections, again, you can go here to the visibility and take the lights from the specularity, and right away you will see that the light is not going to affect that. By the way, we're not using SSS, okay? But some materials might use SSS. You have to be aware of that. Sometimes when we use preset, and I use preset on both of the materials here, the SSS subsurface scattering is operating in both of them. Okay, so if I take out, you see the results. Okay, so be aware of that. So the rest of the things I'm going to keep. Actually, I'm going to keep the specular as well. I kind of like the idea of having a little bit of specularity coming from this light. Let me see if we can tweak the shadows. If you want to disable the shadows completely to see before and after, you can try to do that as well. Okay. Another thing that helps is if you go back to the sky dome. I kind of regret of taking this light out of the specularity. I think the specularity helps us to make the brightness of the metals, for example, pops up a little bit. Can you see the reflection? Yeah, I think this is a good thing. And SSS is going to kind of make this thing very bright. So let me see, 0.5 is okay-ish. And this light should also work with indirect. Indirect is, again, is the bounced light that we have on the scene. This is going to be very hard to see, but if you see the light going from, you know, the shadow coming from the light here, this part here is going to be even darker if we take out the indirect, okay? It tends to be darker because we have more shadows and we have less bounced light, okay? Indirect illumination has to do with something, you know, related with that. Transmission is for transparency. I'm not using transparency anywhere. So if you tweak this thing, it's not going to make any sense. So I suggest you to keep this setting off, okay? Let's suppose that you want to see more shininess or more brightness in some specific parts. If that's the case, you can create specific lights to reach this effect. So for example, you can create a area light here, and you can select the light, go to the panels and select this option, look for selected. Now your light will behave like a camera. So you can, for example, select the tower here, hit F to focus on the tower, and if you want, you can put this light like here, and now you can go back to the perspective, okay? Oops, yes, perspective. Why I did that? Just to align my light a little bit better, okay? And this light here, we could make it a little bit bigger, okay? And let's suppose that you want this light to illuminate, so let's put exposure of, I don't know, 1. Try to remember that exposure is a multiplier of the intensity, okay? So you take the intensity and you take this value exposure and you can multiply by the intensity. So basically this is the way this light operates. If you want a little bit of yellow on this light, just to make a test, okay, we can do that. So let's move this thing a little bit close to the tower. Let's try to rotate this a little bit more. I'm doing that, you know, to take this thing out of the tree. I don't want this light influencing the tree at all. And I'm going to just demonstrate how this thing is going to work here. So I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining. But this light right now is not doing almost anything. So if we increase the value absurdly, of course, is going to make a lot of difference. So just so you know how this thing works, I have this yellowish light here. You can, for example, you can go down here and you can disable certain things. Okay, so let's suppose that you want, for some reason, that this light do not work with diffusion. Can you see the difference? So this is basically the final effect. You can also take everything from specularity. So if the materials have some sort of specular, you can literally make this light, you know, do not emit specularity at all. So as you can see, no specularity whatsoever. I will do that because I want a little bit of shininess. Of course, the intensity is still very, very high. We should take care of that. Again, my main light is coming from this direction, right? So we should, in this case here, I'm literally painting with light, okay? So that's my idea with this light here. So you can push this guy back a little bit. You can make it huge, okay? And you can make like up. And you can rotate this thing a little bit just to follow the direction of the light itself. And doing that, you can provide more lighting to this part. So remember that you can also make this thing invisible for certain things. Okay, sometimes you have to stop the render and start again just to have access to certain settings. So in this case, I can double this, just to make this part more shiny, okay? Just to have something to shine. But in this case, if you don't want the shadows fighting, let's suppose that that's not your intention, okay? So if you don't want the shadows to fight too much, you can simply go here and disable cast shadows, okay? So you see this thing happening. So that's basically the difference between before and after. Okay, so in this case here I am casting shadows. The shadows are not good, I would say. You can tweak the angle. Tweaking the angle, you have things more, you know, smooth or so on. Having more intensity on this type of light usually works better. Okay, so I'll put 2. Since this is like literally a skylight, so you can take a temperature. If you go left, you create more warm colors. If you go right, more cold colors. Okay, more cold temperature. I think this is a good one. If you look to the shadows on the rocks here, you notice that the shadow is very pronounced. Okay, if you want a shadow more, you know, like the end of the day. Okay, so you go here to the angle and you can tweak this angle a little bit, and you will see that this is basically the effect. Okay, so this is a pretty cool way of working with external light. So I think I have covered all the settings. Again, if you're not using something like volume lights, like indirect we are using, of course. If you're not using something, disable that, because it's going to make your life easier, I would say. One last thing I would like to mention is, in this case here, you have shadow density. You can make the shadow more pronounced or less pronounced. Okay. Volumetric shadows is something that I'm not going to cover, but volumetric shadows has something to do with that effect called God rays. Okay, so what I did here is just put a extra light to make this part a little bit bright, but I think it's way too much, probably way too much. Okay, so we need to go to the light itself and we need to tweak down this guy a little bit. Okay, so that's basically the procedure. If you want to again disable the shadows, you can. Okay, be aware that if you use this option normalize, the size of the light will affect the amount of light that this light emits. Okay, so this is pretty much the effect of this small setting here. Normalize is something to do with the way the shape influence the amount of light that this guy emits. Okay, so you can use like pretty small object and emit a huge amount of light. So having this type of thing, it's a good thing to get this very brightness scene, I would say. Very let's crank up this thing. And oh, by the way, camera is a way to hide or to show the shape of the light. You probably don't want to mess with that. You probably want to disable that as well. And now I would like to talk a little bit about quality when it comes to rendering. But you just have to think that with this AI Skydome light, I will have probably most of the light I need. If you want to do night light, for example, you can tweak the color of this Skydome to use a cold color. Okay, if you want, you can use color temperature as well. And you can go towards, you know, something very, very cold. And besides that, you can, and this is the effect of the light temperature. So I'm focused on trying to do something very warm. So if you go left, you're going to create something very, very warm, like the desert, I would say, or even hell. If you go to the other direction, if you go to the middle, you're going to work with light, like white lights, the ones you use on the photography studio, or cold lights. Okay, so you have basically those three types. I'm going to put a little bit of warm on this thing. Okay, and we can also work with the exposure. Okay, if that's the case, but I think my scene is pretty good, so I don't have to tweak the exposure. So if you want, you can just to punch a little bit up. Again, doing night scenes is exactly the opposite. Okay, you just have to do exactly the opposite of what we've been doing. And now I would like to spend some time talking about quality. Okay, when it comes to quality, there is an order to do this kind of thing. Okay, to explain how this thing works, I would like to demonstrate this through one very specific camera. So I'm going to fire up my render here to see where I stopped. So my scene is very bright, again, because this is a very cartoony and stylized scene. Let's go to the camera shape 5 because I'm using this one as a reference, okay? And I will explain the whole optimization process on this thing. First of all, right now my scene is rendering already, okay? And there's a bunch of numbers here. And those numbers, they mean first, the size of the render, which camera I'm using, and something called samples. Samples is extremely important when it comes to rendering, okay? On modern renders like Arnold, sample is basically the heart of the concept behind optimizing scenes. And that's very important, but at the same time very simple. I don't want to complicate things. So what I'm going to do here on this Arnold render view is I'm going to click on this small arrow here. And every time I do a render, I will click on this button here to store a snapshot, okay? And this guy also have a very important information, which is how much time this image with this size is taking to render. So in this case, 27 seconds, okay? The order of optimization, what I mean by order of optimization is we should do things on a very specific order. And now it's super important to bring our light manager back. Okay, so I'm going to stop the render here. I'm going to Window, Rendering Editors, Light Editor. And here I have access to all my lights, okay? I can disable all, enable all. I can, for example, see just one light on my scene, okay? If I click on this button here, I will solo just that light. So this is exactly what this light is doing, okay? This is the contribution of this light to my entire scene, which is really interesting. Looks like a night light. But you have to understand that I turn some things off of this light. So if you select here, you can use of course, the property editor, but you can also use the attribute editor to see exactly what I mean. Everything here should be working. So I have like all the settings working, but for some reason, my entire scene is very, very dark. Why this thing is happening? First of all, because part of the lighting, the overall lighting, is coming from this guy here called AI Sky Dome. Okay, so if I turn this thing off and bring this thing here, you see that this light itself is doing most of the job. So this guy here is just adding a little bit to the lighting. Okay. And when I bring the last one, this one, you will see that this one is doing some reflections and some rim lights on the top. And I kind of like the idea of this one. He's helping, but not too much. Okay? And every single light should play a role. And if you think that the intensity is too much or the exposure is too much, you can select the lights and you can tweak, of course, here. But the most important thing is, what should I do to optimize my images? The first thing is, if you go to the light, you will always see different settings. Most of the times we have like the same settings here. But if you go to the attribute editor, you will see that there is a small difference between the lights. Okay, that's why I'm using 3 different lights, just to show you how those settings they operate. Basically, those settings here, they are common, they are universal to all the lights. And the one specific setting controls the quality of this specific light. Okay, and the setting is samples. Okay, I recommend you to select all the lights, okay, all the lights, and tweak the samples at once. So if you select all the lights and go to sample and change here, all the other samples are going to change because we are seeing exactly the same values. If you select your light on the outliner and try to change everything on the attribute editor, you are going to change just the last light you selected. So that's why this guy is so important to me. Okay, so selecting all the lights, go to samples, and we are going to put here something like 3 samples and hit enter. When we hit enter, Arnold is going to start render again because you know, it's we call this thing IPR. Okay, Maya also have a IPR button here. This is the interactive preview render, but this is a feature that exists inside Arnold. So Arnold is going to try to render using his own IPR. Okay, when we reach the end, you will see, first of all, we have to click on this button here to create the snapshot too, and let's compare. 27 seconds, we have the same samples, but we kind of changed the samples. Why the samples are the same? Because those samples here are not related with the light, but it's kind of visible. Okay, it's kind of small. Let's make this thing a little bit bigger. Okay, let's close to the window, to the image. Okay, this is really amplified, and you can click on this, and see before, after, and there is some small differences here and there. Okay, and you can see here, for example, there's some small differences. We still have a lot of noise, so now is the time to forget about the lights, because apparently the lights are not helping too much on this task. Okay, and one might ask why we are not tweaking the lights here, because this is not a light, this is a material. Okay, so in this case here we have nothing to do other than tweak the samples on the main scene. Now that we play with the scene, by the way, if you want to go back to 100%, click there. If you see something blue here, click again, because this image is selected, and doesn't matter what you do. If you render something else, you are going to still seeing this thing. Okay, so if you don't want to do that, just click on this guy. Okay, let's try. Now that we have 3 samples, don't go far from that unless you really need. But for the majority of the scenes, 3 samples on the lights is more than enough. We can close this thing, okay? And now we can jump to the second part of the optimization. The optimization, I mean, taking out of the noise, okay? Trying to work on this noise. To do that, we need the render settings. The render settings you can also access on window, renders settings, or just clicking on this button here. So if you bring this guy back, you go straight to Arnold render, okay? And something very important here is to notice that this thing works as a multiplier. So when we multiply the settings, we multiply the settings on the entire scene, and we kind of make things better, but not always, okay? Right away, I'm seeing a problem here, because basically the standard value for Arnold is 3, and the rest of them 2. So this is the most basic setting. When we start a scene, everything is usually around 3 samples, okay? Let me basically explain what we're going to tweak and what we're not going to tweak, okay? So transmission, let's go from bottom to top, okay? Volume indirect. This is for effects like God rays, volumetric effects, things that we are not going to use for sure inside Maya anytime soon, okay? SSS, subsurface scattering. So every single material that have a subsurface scattering. What is that, by the way? If you select any material, okay? And if you are using AI standard surface, you have a property here called subsurface. If you tweak this value above 0, any value above 0, you turn this thing on. Okay, so you are literally allowing the light to go inside this object. Since this is a rock, that doesn't make any sense unless this was like a precious stone, something like that. Okay, but 0, the light do not go inside. Any value above 0, the light can go through the object. As you can see, when I tweak that, my material on the screen is brighter and brighter and brighter. Why? Because the light is going inside. Okay, you don't want to do that on a rock, of course, but this is basically the setting. So every single material like wax, skin, milk, honey, they use SSS. Okay, transmission. Transmission is for transparency. So every single material on your scene that have transparency, if you are seeing noise inside the object when you try to render, you should tweak the transmission. Again, this noise is inside the object because the light that travels inside the object is going to be calculated and probably need more samples to get out with a perfect clean result. In that case, you should pay attention to this slider here. Okay, so since I'm not using any volume indirect, I can turn this thing down, but that doesn't make any sense for us. If you don't have anything on your scene, Arnold is just going to ignore. In the past, we had this recommendation to turn this thing down, but now the render is kind of smart. Okay, and I noticed something on my scene that is bothering me for quite some time, which is this reflection on the tower. I will fix this later on, probably offline. Okay, just so you know, this is wrong. Okay, this stone from the walls and the thing, this should not have this reflection. Okay, this is weird. Anyway, coming back here, specular is the most bright point on the object. Okay, this is specular. If for some reason you have glass, metal, and the surface of the object is with a lot of noise, you should tweak the specular. Okay, diffuse is the quality of the indirect illumination. As you can see here, we have a lot of noise. Okay, so if I take down this value completely and try to render, you will see that I will render faster, but my image is going to be extremely noisy and at the same time darker. Okay, because I'm not calculating the indirect illumination anymore. Eventually I do that when I'm working on very stylized scenes and I don't want any global illumination solution on my scenes. Okay, but you will see that all the parts that used to have some sort of indirect illumination, they are darker now. So let me put this thing back and you will see right away that the things are kind of brighter and they will receive a little bit of light. Can you see that? So that's the power of the indirect illumination. Okay, so keep that in mind if you want to take the noise of those dark areas, or if you want to see more bounced light and this type of calculation with a little bit of more precision, you should increase this thing a little bit more. But if you increase the diffusion, okay, since this thing works as a multiplication, your scene is going to render a little bit slower. Okay, but right away when I tweak this value here, you can see the difference, and I have like 11 seconds because I'm not using a lot of things like volume indirect. I just have to save this image, and let's see, this is now, this is before. Can you see? Less noise, and this is exactly what I want. So if you tweak this value a little bit more, we might have even less noise. We might have even better quality on the indirect illumination. Okay, so this is cool. I'm rendering super fast actually. I'm not having any performance issues. Let's try to work on this thing here. Noise. Okay, so we can try to work on the specular here a little bit. Okay, so if I tweak this value specular a little bit up, I might see some progress. I'm not sure. So, oh, that's the problem. Since this thing is blue, the image is selected. I'm not seeing what is rendering on the back. Oh, okay. Can you see? Now, before, now, before, now, before. Okay, so it's working. And we can keep doing this tweaks individually, and at the end we will need to also increase the camera AA samples, and this is the last one. Okay, so the most important, actually the order of importance here is exactly that, from top to bottom. Okay, so but the order of tweaking is from bottom to top. Okay, this is my professional tip for you. So try to analyze your scene and see what you have, and then try to tweak value by value until you reach the top. When you reach the top, you solve problems like this. Okay, so if that's the case, we can put 4. And if you go back to your images, you'll notice that when we tweak certain things, so for example, I increase the specular and the diffusion, and you can see the numbers here. So 6, 3, 2, 2, 2, 0 is exactly that. So it's the order of the optimizations. Okay, so keep that in mind, because those values, they are multiplications. So it's a little bit danger to over sampling things right away. Okay, so this is now, before, now, before. Okay, so that's a very, very good starting point. Okay, usually I can go depending on my scene, depending on the settings, depending on the size of the image as well, because right now the size of this image is super small. Okay, I can tweak this value up to 6. Okay, just to see a little bit of better results on the overall rendering. Sometimes I kind of go up on the other settings, but you have to remember again, the real sample is not this. The real sample is this value here. So this is a multiplication. So every time we go up one number, this number is multiplied 4 times, and we have this result here. And this is way too much. So this is a huge amount of samples. Okay, so you have to be aware of that if you go up too much, this will take longer to render. Okay, now I would like to talk about the final settings for rendering and how to proper render images. Let's suppose that everything is fine, the settings are fine, so you are ready to generate your images, and now you have to set up this thing and learn how to render all your cameras. Now that we understood the process of optimizing scenes, we understand the concept of samples, we have like this very basic lighting, and we are ready to render the scene. We have to set up everything before start rendering. To do that, let's go back to the render settings and go back to the common tab. Okay, I'm going to close everything here. Okay, and start talking about the most important things. First of all, image size. Okay, so the image size you should work is HD, like full HD, this one. Okay, so I'm going to choose this one, and this is going to be the size of the image. Okay, but there's a lot of other presets that you can choose. Please work with this size because this is a very good size. So this is basically the settings. And renderable cameras. Okay, we have a lot of cameras here, so you can select the main cameras that you're going to render, but this information is not that important. Okay, this is to be honest, this is more important when we work with batch rendering, and we are not going to work with batch rendering at all. Okay, but you can choose, for example, CamShot 5. CamShot 5, by the way, is the one I use to tweak my scene. So this is camshot 5. I kind of like this angle very much. The next important setting is the file output itself. So there's a lot of types of file output that you can use. In some, I do not advise you. So for example, for professional composition, we always use deep EXR, or most of the time, 99% of the time, we use EXR, okay? Because this format is extremely powerful. We use on professional production. So in the future, when you work on composition, special effects, and so on, you will probably work with this guy. Okay, but this is pretty advanced, and just so you know, this file here is capable of having different layers of information. Okay, which layers? The information that your render is capable of outputting. So in this case, we have this AOV. Okay, the AOV is the place where we can output every single pass of our image. So for example, we can output just the albedo color, just the basic color. We can output the diffuse color, just the diffuse color without any interference of the shadow, the reflection, and so on. We can output the emission. So for example, if we do that, Maya is going to output just the materials with some sort of emission. We can output, for example, the specular. We are going to have the specular separated on our image, and this is extremely important because in the future, if you want to tweak any of the settings that composes your image, you just have to go to that specific layer, that specific node, that specific information, and you can tweak this information there. Okay, this is a very safe way of working to avoid going back to the render. But this is out of the scope of this course. Eventually I will show you how to do that, but the most important thing for us is we are not going to use EXR, we are not going to use any of that, okay? My advice for you, you can use PNG, it's a very solid format. You can use GIF as well, it's a very, very good format. But GIF is going to generate like huge files, okay? Let's stick with PNG. For during this course, because PNG also have transparency. If you render your images with transparency, what I mean by that is if you render your image, and if your image have a alpha channel like this, you can have this information. You don't even have to cut your image. When you bring this PNG inside Photoshop, you will see the transparency in the background already. You just have to use some sort of sky, whatever, to cover this background. Okay, so this is really cool, and you can use that. Okay, so let's stick with PNG. You can change the format. This is not necessarily at all. Okay, you just have to pay attention if your sky dome is invisible to the camera. Otherwise, you will not have alpha to work with. Okay, you have to cut this thing by hand, and the result might not be that good. Okay, so after the file output, you will also have the frame range. Frame range is just useful if you are using some sort of animation. Okay, which is not the case. Okay, let's go to the file output once more because I would like to show you something important. Here we have the frame animation extension. In this case here, depending on what you are selecting, Maya is going to render a single frame, okay, or a sequence of frames. Okay, we use those options here for animations, okay, and those two options here for single cameras, for single shots, which is exactly what I want from this course. My advice for you is take this one, name.ext, ext extension. So I'm going to save this file like this. So this is going to be main scene lighthouse island.png. I will save this name on this path here inside my project, inside images, and you will see this image there. Okay, so how to render the final image? Very, very simple. After you set all those things, after you define the image size, after you define the extension that you are going to use, You just have to save your scene one last time, and you can change from modeling to rendering, and then go to render and use this option called render sequence. Don't worry, although this is called sequence doesn't mean necessarily that this is going to render just animation, okay? So if you go to the options, you will see here that we have a lot of things, okay? By default, you have almost nothing, okay? You have, usually you have nothing, okay? But you have this options here. So something I would like to do is, we have this current camera here. Current camera, cam shot 1, 2, blah, 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 blah. Those are the renderable cameras, okay? So you can render all render enable cameras, okay? So this is kind of cool. And all render enable layers. Okay, you don't have any layers yet. I'm going to show you layers in a sequence, because with layers we can do a lot of very, very funny and interesting things. We can render different versions of our scene, okay? So I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to select all render enable camera. If you want to change your camera, you can change here. So in this case, I would like to output just this camera, okay? If I want to put just this camera, I don't have to select anything else, okay? I don't have to point to a output, because I already have, I'm working since the beginning with this project, okay? So I already have the folder images inside the project folder, and this is the folder where Maya is going to save my images, okay? So I don't have to do anything else, and I just have to render sequence and close. This concludes our very long series about how to create an entire project from the concept to the final. And I would like to finish this thing showing you some sort of composition and how to do that thing inside Photoshop. And I also promise to try to show you how to work with render layers. But since this video is already very, very long, I would like to do this thing on another opportunity. Okay, so we still have at least 1 month before this course finish. So it's actually a long time, and I will show you this thing on the next project, I promise. This is not the last project I did. This is probably the most complex in the sense of giving you a lot of details, but I will promise to show this thing on a next opportunity. Okay, I really hope that you liked and that you enjoyed, because that cost me a long time in the sense of, you know, trying to explain everything and how I did every single object and how the techniques I used, and everything I did for you know, thinking about giving you the most important knowledge on how to create objects, how to lay out a scene, how to work with lights, how to work with rendering, how to optimize scenes. The rest of the knowledge about how to composite this thing, you already have this knowledge, okay? So I really hope to see you in the class during the next weeks, and I wish you all the best, okay? Until the next project. See you. Bye-bye.